So why don't we get things
As did I.
started? I'm going to call the meeting to order. We'll call the meeting to order. Michael, if you can bring up the flag, we'll do the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible. Sorry. All right, Michael, you can go back to the regularly scheduled program. All right, the next item is the approval of the meeting agenda. Just want to note for the budget transfers item before we take this item up. That's going to be at our next month's meeting, I believe, because they're still working on some things as they work to close the year out. So can I get a motion to approve the meeting agenda?
This is
Ms.
Karen
Stowe?
Herschel. Oh, okay.
Okay, so Ms. Stowe made the motion and Ms. Hirsch seconded it. Any discussion on the meeting agenda? A special meeting, so not a lot of options here. All those in favor, I'm going to do a roll call vote. Mr. Bernstein's a yes. Ms. Stowe?
Yes.
Ms. Hirsch?
Yes.
Ms. Downey?
Yes.
I don't know if Mr. Kelly has joined us yet. Come back to him. Ms. Kowalski?
Yes.
Karen, thank you. Ms. Olson?
I said yes.
Yes.
And Mr. Scher. And I think Mr. Kelly is joining us now. So we're voting on the meeting agenda. No worries. Technology has gotten us. Can we put you down for a yes on the meeting agenda?
Yes.
Thank you. Just to take a short pause, just by way of introduction, thank you for joining us for what is our, I don't know how many virtual meeting. Hopefully one day I won't have to say that. Meetings being conducted pursuant to the governor's executive order 7B. Per that order, we're recording the meeting. It'll be posted on our webpage as well as our YouTube channel. Before we start, a couple of things to help us out. So the agenda is found on our Board Docs website. You can get there by going to the Greenwich Schools page and clicking on Board of Education and then meetings. This is a special meeting, so we're not taking public comments, but of course the public can email the board, and they have been, at our single board member address, which is boardofedmembers@greenwich.k12.ct.us. So the meeting tonight is going to consist of discussion and action by and among the superintendent, board members, the cabinet, and we have some external folks joining us tonight. Of course, I'm going to ask participants to stay muted when they're not speaking. Also state your name each time you speak. That's part of the executive order. We'll be using the raise the hand function, and that comes in the order it's received. So I can call on people in turn. I'd ask that board members try to keep their comments concise. And then for any voting, of course, we'll be using roll call. So with that, we'll turn to the consent agenda. Can I get a motion to accept the consent agenda? Ms. Olson, is there a second for that? Ms. Downey, great. All right, all those in favor of the consent agenda. Bernstein is a yes. Ms. Stowe?
Yes.
Ms. Hirsch?
Yes.
Ms. Downey?
Yes.
Mr. Kelly?
Yes.
Ms. Kowalski?
Yes.
Thank you. Ms. Olson?
Yes.
And Mr. Scher?
Yes.
All right, great. So we're going to move on to our discussion items. The first discussion item is the superintendent's update. So I'll turn it over to Dr. Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Bernstein. Right now, we're really getting ready for the end of the school year. As we know, school ends on June 12th. That's our 180th day. And we've really had those three functions that we've been working on. One were end of year celebrations for 5th grade, 8th grade, high school graduation. Also just our teachers being able to retrieve their personal items and the scheduling of student pickup of items, which sounds a lot easier than it really is. It's taking several weeks to make sure that as we get through all of these processes that It's slow that we're making sure social distancing is happening and, that we're complying with the order. And I commend all of our staff, especially our elementary teachers, who they are the only people who really know what's in their classroom that belongs to who. So they are having plastic bags, putting all the children's items in there, labeling them, and then the families are driving through to pick those up. At the middle school, the principals worked really closely with our custodial team to empty all the lockers. It's a huge task. So I just kudos to all the administrators and the staff who are really pulling together in an unprecedented time to get the end of the year. I will say for GHS graduation, if it didn't go out today, I know it's coming out with either tomorrow or Monday. They've been working very hard this week to really solidify, because the orders for graduation came out last Thursday evening. So, making sure they're finalizing plans on what that's going to look like. It is quite restrictive. They listed and gave us 3 different options. So it won't look like a traditional graduation, but Mr. Mayo will have those details to senior families and the students. And we did meet with student government again this week, just to walk through and talk through things with the seniors that are part of the senior government as well. We also had another executive order update yesterday that came out, which references summer school, and it's the guidance for summer school. We have already let our parents and everybody know that we are doing distance learning for our general education summer school. Now, while the executive order says we could have summer school on July 6th, and you could have some small entry within the building, what we are planning right now, and Mary Ford will be talking to her special education community as we work on this today, tomorrow. We are going to open one building, very limited, for some of the unique services. But if you actually look at the document that was released, it's in preparation for September. Let me just say it looks just like CDC guidance. The temperature of every single person who comes in a building has to be taken. Social distancing has to be maintained. No groupings in the classroom larger than 10. Busing, our full-size yellow buses that we have could only hold 12 students, possibly a few more if you have some siblings, because they could sit next to each other. So we couldn't meet the guidance for summer school, even if we wanted to right now. The guidance also suggests things like changing out all of the water faucets to be automated, automated paper towel holders. And as you can imagine, in a district our size, we're looking at, okay, what does this guidance say for September now? And how are we going to start really looking at September? And we couldn't be ready for September if our buildings were full either this summer. It's going to take a tremendous amount of work. So we also had Cardinal Stadium at Planning and Zoning, which, that doesn't sound, it's exciting to be there. It's to see it actually now starting to go through the process. So that happened this week. I also do want to mention I had a meeting with the PTAC last Friday, and there was a meeting and they followed up with a bunch of questions on distance learning, and just, our community is obviously nervous about next fall, what that's going to look like. And I just want to assure the board and the community that there is a team of people working on the reopening right now, and everybody is gathering all of the different components from what does even the guidance we got yesterday for, I'm gonna give you an example. If we have a teacher who feels that they are in a compromised situation, not only do we have to have a mask for them, we have to provide a shield. So we wouldn't normally have thought, well, we're gonna have to purchase shields. So, we're doing the pricing for things like that. On our school reopening, it involves people like the health department, we have a doctor who consults for us, obviously facilities, safety, security, our curriculum team, how do you deliver curriculum, maintain social distancing, food services. Right now, you couldn't actually have kids in a cafeteria. That's not allowed. So we're looking at all of those different pieces, and we will need a representative from the Board of Education. And I shared that with Mr. Bernstein. So I'm hoping somebody has a real interest in that, and it could consume quite a bit of time for the meetings. Just making sure that we have 3 different options. One is you enter as normal, which all of the health professionals are saying probably isn't going to happen. One is a hybrid plan where you're ready to start school face-to-face, And right now, the guidance is if one student tests positive in a school, you immediately are out 2 to 5 days. So you could be in school, out of school, in school, out of school. And then the other, obviously, is distance learning and preparing for what that looks like, and being very, very flexible going into next fall, assuming that, things are, that all of our health professionals are correct and they don't think there will be an immunization, and that we will largely be somewhat in this situation again, come the fall, whether that's September, October, November. So that's where we are right now. And I think Christina was going to mention some of the PTA conversation.
Yes, thank you, Tony. Just from PTAC as the liaison to them, just a couple of events coming up. They are having their Volunteer Essence Award. They're still going to have a ceremony taking place this coming Tuesday, May 26th at 10 a.m. I don't know if I have the Zoom information on that. There's also, they're still going to do an end of year council dinner to thank the volunteers and give out awards, which they had to move the date because of the high school graduation. So it's now going to be on June 16th at 7:30 p.m. And the one thing that they did want to promote is they're trying to do a fundraiser to help the various PTAs which lost the opportunity to fundraise this spring. So there's going to be a fun night with a magic show in town. It's all the schools are participating in terms of publicizing it. So it'll be in the newsletters that come home electronically. And that magic show event is going to be on June 2nd at 7 p.m. Again, virtually with a lineup of musicians. So they're trying to really help bolster the pocketbooks of the PTAs that didn't have an opportunity to fundraise this spring. So thank you.
And that's all for me, Mr. Bernstein.
Okay, I see some hands up. Ms. Hirsch?
Hi, Tony. Thanks for the update. You actually addressed exactly what I was going to ask. I know I had reached out about 2 weeks ago asking you about what our plans for establishing a reopening committee or a working group might look like, as I know, a bunch of other districts have already started that as well, like Westport, New Canaan, Ridgefield, et cetera, Weston. Because I know that we really need to focus on all the things that you were saying, and I've obviously spent quite a bit of time looking into this myself. But again, I'd love to know when we're, if we're going to be having regular updates or whatever. And I don't know if any other board members are interested, but I will certainly toss my name in the hat if you need a representative.
Yes, thank you for that. My approach for us really has been the committee people are all doing their work right now, so that when we bring the committee together, we don't end up spending 2 or 3 meetings just kind of brainstorming and hashing. So the people that really know facilities are looking at pricing and looking at facilities issue. People like Mary Keller, who's our head nurse, that just served on the task force for us. And again, we just got that document yesterday. So we're ahead of the game. It's just, we're very laser focused on everybody's specialty area, really talking about those components, so that when we come together, our plan is going to have the detail and the data behind it to really understand, what could work for us. Even doing things like in the facility side, pulling all of the maps of all of the buildings. This is Tom Bobkowski, and making sure we understand the square footage, the size of every classroom, because although they say no larger than 10, it's really based on square footage and how big a classroom is. So if a classroom is 600 square feet, you're going to have fewer children than you could have in some of our rooms that are 1,000 square feet. So we're pulling all of that together so that we will have a really great database, so that when a committee comes together, everybody's sharing their roles and their pieces, and they've done a tremendous amount of homework.
Okay, thank you again for the update. I know we are going to really need a very well-defined approach to reopening our schools and to address a lot of the questions and concerns, and how we can do it really to focus on the academics and the social and emotional well-being of our students, as well as addressing the needs, of our community. So thank you for taking the leap on this already.
Yeah, well-defined is a good way to put it. It's a Herculean effort, I think.
All right, as Tony mentioned, if there are board members that are interested in serving on the reopening committee, just shoot me an email after the meeting. Next up, Mr. Kelly.
Hello. I would like to point out a positive for this recent situation. We had our distant coaching program turned out to be certainly a positive event. As I spoke to the athletic director today, our coaches got very creative. They stay engaged with the kids. They created cyber competitions. They had them doing unique exercises and had them doing training programs. But the most important thing is they stayed connected with the kids. Obviously, the sports in general for spring was a disappointment. But if you could pull positive out of a disappointing situation, we found a way to do so. The athletic director said, and some of the coaches I spoke to and some of the families who benefited from our distance coaching all had positive things to say. Having our kids engaged with more than just school, to have extracurricular activity involved with our kids was something very important. And generally just a really good experience. I'm glad we took that on. Kudos to the coaches. Good job, athletic director, and just good to see a positive experience out of this situation.
All right, thank you. Mr. Scher.
Tony, thank you for that update. I really have two questions. I have two questions. The first one is, how would you summarize the feedback that you have been getting from parents about the effectiveness of instruction and learning that students have been getting since we went out?
It's very mixed. I had a letter today that was absolutely glowing. They love it. They feel like their child is flourishing. And then I'll get a letter that's the opposite. And I think it depends on the family, it depends on family circumstance, depends on the teacher and the teacher skill set. So I think it's very mixed, but we are continuing to grow. We're even with summer school and distance learning, we're changing the job description to continue that growth. And I think we will look different in the fall because we've gone through this and teachers have had an opportunity to learn some new skill sets, and we're going to continue to offer professional development so people can continue to grow. But it's very mixed. It's kind of a love-hate, quite frankly. The emails are either very, very positive or they're frustrated.
And just as a follow-up to that, when should parents expect that their children will receive a streamed internet class with live instruction?
We're actually running summer school with live instruction on a schedule, but I will say, I kind of chuckled this week as one of the private schools sent out their information and they want all of their teachers to be working on synchronous, asynchronous, because what we're finding is there isn't one, whether you're synchronous or asynchronous, one is not better than the other, but we are moving in that direction for summer school. And we're continuing to grow, but part of that, when you talk about live streaming, it's going to depend on our schedules in the fall. If we can only have half of the students in the building at a time, just the way the schedules work, it's going to have a whole different element of what type of camera you would even have in a classroom, because a teacher doesn't just stand at the board and talk at kids. You have to have a system where the camera is moving around the room, following the teacher. So we have a lot of discussion to do in preparation for the fall. But I think if you see what we're doing in the summer, we're continuing to grow and learn. And I know Anne's going to give a report here shortly, so I'll leave it at that because I'm sure she'll talk about that for you.
And my second question was, by what date will we be, and maybe it's a question more for the board, by what date will we be deciding for September whether schools will be distance learning or it will be in-school instruction? By what date are we committed to communicate that to the community and school parents?
I don't think you can commit that right now, Mr. Scher, because, you know, being out of school was by executive order. So now if the order really changes and they allow districts to make a local decision, then certainly that would be different. But so much of what we're doing is being governed by the executive orders that if we're still under an executive order to, you know, limit social distancing, and we're looking at like a hybrid sort of plan, you know, the board certainly could make that choice just to do distance, but we would have to honor a hybrid if that's basically what we're being, you know, told that we have to do.
I'm sorry, I didn't ask her my question properly. You've raised that perfectly. By what date do we need to make the decision, regardless of what the state mandates are, to the negative case, which is we will be full distance learning? We may make a decision, as an example, in a district for the safety and security of our town, or as you pointed out, many of our rooms in our schools are entirely too small to do social distancing. We already know this today. Any member of the board has known it for a long time. So by what date does the board need to make that decision so that you can effectively start school on whatever it is? I don't know what the date is, August 30th or September, whatever. By when do we need to make that decision?
Yeah, I think we can press right up until almost the start of school, 2 weeks before the start of school, because all of the planning should be done by then. And we have to be prepared to have multiple systems next year, you know, to be in school, a hybrid system, or total distance learning, because there is nobody in the country that can tell us right now what it's going to look like in September. So we need to be ready to go for all three of those, and we will be. And we're starting that preparation right now. And
So
you know,
2 weeks beforehand is your answer.
I think 2 weeks beforehand, more than anything, just, you know, communicating to families and having ample time for everybody to ask questions and understand it. Let's say the board decided that this childhood COVID is too close to Greenwich, and you want to keep, you know, students home, and it's not an executive order. You know, we probably would have, I would imagine you'd want to have some, you know, a special meeting where people could send questions, and you talk about that and why the board is making that decision against an executive order that says you can be open. So you know, I think you would want to give yourself at least the 2 weeks. Instructionally, you know, we will, you know, we're going to be ready to go. We have to be.
Peter, I know the last time I raised these issues, I was called Chicken Little, but they've all come to real issues of the board. So when we get to agenda planning, there has to be a policy level and strategic discussion at the board level. Tony has said operationally she'll plan for all three, but I think we have to have a conversation sooner rather than later about a whole series of issues, not the least of which is when are we going to open, so on and so forth, because we have unique conditions. There's also issues of, you know, there may be parents in Greenwich who don't send their kids back, very likely until there's a vaccine. There's a whole set of issues. So I think we need to find a time as a board sooner rather than later to have a thoughtful discussion amongst the 8 of us about potential scenarios and what we're going to do. We also need to kind of give some direction to the administration in addition to what they're figuring out kind of on their own.
So, Tony, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say that's really what this the group, it comes down to this, the entire team of professionals that actually work within each component, and, you know, driven by the health, driven by facilities. You know, we already recognize that some parents and some teachers may not want to come back, and we don't know what those numbers are yet. But the planning that this team has to do has to be flexible. And if we have a teacher who is, you know, immune compromised and they don't feel like they can come back, they are a teacher that could teach elementary children from 11 different schools in second grade. They don't all have to come from even the same school. So it'll be utilizing all of our staff even differently. And I think that if you will, you know, give us time for each person that's doing different components and then being able to report back to the board so that everybody understands kind of where we are. It's, you know, there are so many planning documents out there right now. It's not like we have to reinvent. And just the document, like I say, that came out yesterday, if I can certainly forward that to the board if you want to look at it. It's extremely, you know, just even detailed in the facility aspect. The curriculum aspect, we're also working very hard to make sure that, you know, we'll be prepared for that.
That was a joyous 66 pages of reading, I have to tell you.
Yeah, very much so. So Tony, I did forward to the board both the state guidelines that came out as well as the CDC guidelines. And of course, the state guidelines that came out only were for summer school, but it really is an indicia of what they're looking at for the fall. So there's a lot of moving parts. I guess, Peter, to respond to you, we can certainly talk about it during agenda planning. My guess is we're going to be meeting throughout the entire summer, which is not the norm for this board. So, you know, buckle up. I think we're going to be talking regularly. With that, Ms. Kowalski.
Sure. So I had a question for Tony, just to, if she could elaborate more so on with respect to Cardinal Stadium and the zoning meeting that happened and where we stand now, and what are the proposed next steps given what we have learned. I think you're on mute, Tony.
Thank you. No, we're actually where we thought we would be.
Sure, I was going to say, I'm sure you were going to instill us with your wisdom, but we weren't hearing it.
No. Yeah, we're actually just being at planning and zoning, and we're excited to be at this point because it means the project is moving forward. And you know, planning and zoning is always a challenge with school construction, always. And there are going to be things they're going to ask us to do differently. We're going to work with them. Our architect was actually working over at the town this morning, just also looking at kind of what those next steps are. And they did discuss the other night kind of a phase 1, phase 2, which, interesting enough, this board discussed quite a bit at length, where you would separate to make sure just the bleachers are more of a priority. But there's a lot of questions that they ask that they are answering right now. The architect team is answering. And we're going to continue to move forward. Probably one of the biggest challenges we think we are going to have is planning and zoning, because of virtual canceled a lot of meetings. So at least from today, what we were hearing is they're quite backlogged. We were hoping to be on the next meeting and they can't get us on. So timing wise, I think that's one reason we left the bleachers up, is so if that happens in the fall, that it can't go as aggressively through planning and zoning, that we, you know, if our season opens, we're still fine. So we're moving ahead. And I don't think it's, as far as comments from planning and zoning, were much different than what often happens in any project. They ask hard questions. They have, you know, and they want answers before they approve projects. So.
All right, Ms. Olson.
Thank you, Tony, for your update and for the work that goes into this. This is obviously clearly an unprecedented time. And I also read the new CDC guidelines and requirements, and there's going to be, you know, the cleaning, social distancing. It's going to require costs. And I guess my question is, how are we planning to pay for this in spite of the recent budget cuts?
You know, that's still to be seen, quite frankly. What we have to do right now, we're taking the summer school guidance. I actually met with Dan Watson and Tom Babuska today, and Sean, and we were looking at what's in the summer school guidance. Things like face shields that weren't on our list that we thought we would probably have to purchase. We need to get pricing on those things. We need to figure out and try to quantify what we're being asked to do and how much what is the cost that's actually going to come behind some of these items. You know, in the guidance yesterday, it talked about disinfecting twice a day. throughout the day. You're supposed to continually be, going in and wiping the restrooms. You can't use blow dryer hands anymore, which Mr. Watson had already turned those off for us. But then you're switching to paper towels. There's a cost to do that. So we're trying to crunch numbers right now, but staffing also, how do you actually disinfect in the evenings twice a day with the custodial staff that we have currently? So yes, it's going to be a challenge financially if this is where we are in September.
Do we have a plan to approach the BET for new appropriations for this?
We haven't got that far in the discussion yet, but I mean, I would hope that our BET would take the same approach that, some of the other communities have said that they would do. I know in Fairfield, they are expecting their COVID money at the end of the year. They're setting up a fund that is to be able to cover this. And it's like 1.5 or 1.8 million. So I'm sure, I mean, the community will recognize if the choice of the board is to have schools open, even if they look different, then we have to make sure we comply with all of the safety aspects.
Okay. Well, thank you again for all of your work with this.
You're welcome.
All right, Ms. Stowe.
All right, Tony, I'm going to echo the thank yous as well. This is a lot of work, and we've obviously been seeing you more than we ever would have thought. So I appreciate that. As we think about the 3 plans,
Yeah.
In the God forbid scenario where we are completely distance learning, I do want us to really think about what we do differently in the fall, just to echo everyone's concerns. And I think that this summer, it sounds like that's going to be sort of a pilot. And I know we're going to hear more about that in a moment. So that's great because we'll learn a lot from that. But I would like to emphasize, I think, and something we've all been sort of saying over and over, I think more live learning would be good. I know that's, and I see that in 2 forms. That's also like video content being delivered by a teacher. It doesn't have to be always interactive. But I just know that I'm coming off a high today at home where one of my children had a really fantastic interactive experience. And it was there haven't been many of those. And was truly excited because new content was learned. And I think that that's really important. And it's hard to schedule that. I know that. I mean, I think about all these kids and all these teachers, and you have to make sure that it doesn't interact with another teacher's live lesson. And there's been some conflicts as well. So I know this is very hard, but if that is one of the scenarios, I'd love to make sure that that's a little tighter as we go into the fall.
Yeah, and I think probably one of the reasons you saw it is because we're continuing to grow. They're doing exactly, what we wanted to see happen. And I think because we've allowed the growth, our teachers have been able to learn the new tools without getting totally stressed out, even as hard as this is. And I think in the fall, what we're really talking about also is our schedules have to look probably different if we were in that difficult situation. And having the kids on the routine aspect, where it looks more like a school routine, because what they're saying right now, if you were in school, is that if you have the positive case, then you're out of school 2 to 5 days. So you could actually be in school for 2 weeks, be out of school for a week, just one school, not all the schools, just one school. So we're looking at that. And for the summer, we're operating on a summer schedule, and it's exactly what you're talking about. And we rewrote the job description even for summer. Because we know it's so critical for our children that are at summer school to really have that level and that quality. And those teachers are we hope are going to be some of our best teachers at distance learning, so that we can also help, bolster that, because it is a different skill. And I do just want to mention that we're also looking at replacing all the faucets. Was one thing that was mentioned. We don't think we're going to be able to do that because that would be like huge, big money. But Mr. Watson just sent me a text since he's not across the room where we can see him. But we are working on that. Yeah, and I think you'll see if you actually look at the job description for summer that we sent out to teachers, it's very, very clear that this has to be a skill set, just even for summer.
Yeah, well, that sounds like a good start. All right, thank you so much.
Welcome.
All right, Mr. Scherer.
Tony, can I go back to the Cardinal Stadium? I got a series of phone calls after the meeting, and some of the things that were said by people who seem to attend that meeting. I did not. Were very confusing. And maybe you or Peter, who's been the main architect of this project and the plan to get it approved, can comment. I understand that someone just said currently our bleachers at the high school are closed and not usable, which I don't understand because they've been shored up. They're approved by the building department and we can use those as long as that goes. I don't understand that representation to the planning and zoning. Can you just clarify that? And then I have a second question.
Oh, sorry, wasn't unmuting me. Yeah, sure. So the bleachers are sitting there and they're shored up and they are closed. They are not open. And we are going to have to go back through in the fall again to see that they hopefully will get approved again. Then they have to be inspected every 30 days to keep them open. And if you remember, we were told going into the second year like this is tough. So, we're hoping that they're going to be approved again, but there's no guarantee. You can have a different inspector with construction, just like you can have a different fire marshal, and they can have a different opinion. So,
are you telling me that they haven't been inspected, or that they were inspected and the town of Greenwich withdrew their approval?
No, they were being inspected every 30 days until they were no longer needed. And then the district had to take over the cost of keeping those bleachers for the rest of the year. They are closed. The bleachers are closed. So to reopen those bleachers, we have to get them inspected again. And then they have to be inspected every 30 days that they are open. It has to be done every 30 days.
Okay, but nobody withdrew a approval, right? They just haven't been inspected because we're not using them because of COVID or whatever, correct?
No, they have to be inspected to maintain the TCO. And I don't know if Dan is elevated as a panelist, but if you want him to help a little bit, Dan, if you're on there. But they have to be inspected to have the occupancy. And it's a temporary certificate of occupancy, and it has to happen every 30 days.
Correct. I
That's
get that
correct.
part.
You can
I was
hear
just
me.
wondering if
So they're not.
denied the TC. Okay. If you could follow that, to clarify, that different than inspected and denied their use. If someone answered that question, that would be helpful. The second thing I understood was the representations that have been made to us on the board regarding going forward, particularly with phase one, is that which would have been the home side bleachers, is that we cannot move forward with the project because we have exceeded our total maximum floor space for that property already. We've known that for a long time. That's the floor area ratio problem. But that there had been representations by the committee, the working group who had worked on this, that there had been dialogue with the planning department, and that there was a belief that we would be able to get a variance to install the bleachers, the home side bleachers. Phase two was a separate question. My understanding is, or it was reported to me, that planning and we said, no, we need you to rezone the property. And then we'll get an additional 200,000 of buildable space, which we will use for this project and many other projects that could potentially come in the future. but that now we have to go not for a variance for the project, but we've been told we need to rezone the property. Could somebody clarify what is going on?
Tony, before you answer, Peter, we're having issues with your audio. It's cutting in and out. I think we've got the gist of your question, but you may want to dial back in at some point. Tony,
Well, here, can you hear me now? Is it better now?
Yeah, that's better. Thank you. Tony, do you want to respond?
So
on
my
the
question was,
area?
Peter, my question was, the project, we understood the premise of the project was we would get a variance for the home side bleachers. I understand, and that were the representations made by the committee that was working on this for the past 3 or 4 years. The question that I have is, I understand that the planning board explained that it is very unlikely we would get that variance, and they said you should proceed with rezoning the property so that you can add all of the floor space in one go that we would need for phase 1, phase 2, and other future projects. Can someone clarify what is the facts?
What I would like to say is, because this is the superintendent's report, this is not meant to be a detailed report about the project, and I don't, it's not my skill set to talk really at that depth about the zoning or not zoning. And there was another meeting that happened this morning where they were working with the planning office. So we would need to have Russ here in the architect in order to really speak to that without somebody misspeaking. So that's what
Tony, I'll take a stab at misspeaking. I don't mind taking a swing at this, Peter. I've been obviously looking at this issue kind of closely, so don't mind taking a swing. I could be wrong, but the way I see it is we have a height variance, which is different than an FAR, and we needed to go anyway for the height variance. We had 2 choices. We could have gone for an FAR variance in addition to the height variance at the same time, or we could have taken guidance from planning and zoning about a zoning change. Now, we were fortunate enough to have planning and zoning make a recommendation for us to look at a zoning change. We were prepared to submit a zoning change and happy to do so. I believe it's a short form, and our attorney's taking care of that right now. So I think we're going to submit, or I know we're going to submit a variance, a zoning change. And upon the planning and zoning's suggestion for us to do so, I think we have a very good chance of getting that. We still need the variance on the height, though. That's different than the FAR. So if we do get the zone change, to your point, Peter, then we will help us going forward on other projects as well. That's my take on it. I hope I didn't mess that up much.
Joe, thanks for the clarification, because there was a lot of confusion, and the only reason I brought it up is because Tony raised Cardinal Stadium in her superintendent's report. So maybe we could have Peter, at some point, a more separate session where we dig into this and get more of an update detail. But I appreciate your clarification, Joe. That helps a lot.
My pleasure.
I've noted that for agenda planning. All right, Ms. Kowalski, I see your hand. Karen, I think you're still muted.
Sorry, didn't click the button. My question, Tony, goes back to summer and distance learning. So we're able to put into this process for the summer virtual learning, which I think many parents probably on your summer loving it, summer hating it list would have preferred to have had sooner rather than later. And maybe summer is the best case. And you have said that part of your job credentials for being a teacher for the summer include those that can specifically do this. So if we end up in a situation in the fall where it's a hybrid approach, or we're still not able to go back, we're trying to figure that out from a distance learning, how are we going to compensate for those teachers that are still not able to do real-time teaching for our classes? Because I think we need to figure out how to address that and start putting a plan together for parents to understand how we're going to address those issues in the fall, because we haven't addressed them in the last 9 weeks, and this is becoming a real concern over what is real learning new content and how are we going to advance these kids. So if our current staff don't have this eligibility because we're actually asking it for the summer program to make sure they have those credentials, what are we going to do in the fall?
Yeah, we know a lot of our staff do have it, and we hear from parents who absolutely love the experience that they're having right now with their teachers. So we have a lot of teachers out there that are making videos of their own teaching. They're flipping their classrooms. They're doing live sessions with kids. They're doing tutorials. We have a lot of that in the district. And I think that, you know, when you talk about compensation is negotiated. That's part of the teacher contract. And you're always going to have teachers that teach differently than the person next door. I think distance learning has been a challenge for some, more so than others, but it's really not any different when we're face to face. Some of the teachers who are really shining on distance learning may struggle more face to face, and some face to face teachers who are absolutely amazing, this has been incredibly difficult for. It is a totally different skill set. So we're working on helping everybody grow. And that's where we are. I mean, and we hope that by the fall, after having this time, that it's really, people have honed their skills significantly from when we first started. We'd never done this before. And distance learning is not digital learning. They're two totally different skill sets. Personalized learning in the classroom, we really prided ourselves on not using technology all of the time and using it when it really made sense to extend the learning. Now we're talking about utilizing technology really for the part of the instructional component. If you go back just a few months ago, we had people upset that maybe we had too much screen time, and the staff kept saying, no, we really don't. Our principals are in the classrooms. We know we're using technology in a wonderful way to personalize learning. Now distance learning, it's flipped that. So, teachers are growing in their skill set. We're all learning new tools, all of us. These meetings are a prime example. A lot of people love these meetings better than the face-to-face ones, but they're getting, it's just different. So we're preparing for that. And the summer, we're changing that. And again, Anne's gonna, Dr. Carabello will talk about that on items, I think it's D, on summer school. So you'll hear a little bit more about what we're doing this summer.
Right, because my overall concern with this and trying to be prepared for the fall in some alternative or hybrid program is the fact that I would have to say that there's a host of elementary kids that are not getting, any actual learning going on. It's independent study. And I'm concerned that, we have a whole slew of kids that are going to be behind the game in the fact that they haven't had actual a connectivity with their teacher and learning and doing RAS Kids and IXL for 90 minutes a day, that's not going to get them to the next level. And I know that there are in Greenwich, there are the haves and the have-nots, and I'm sure the haves are taking care of their own and making sure that their kids are going to be prepared and doing extra things and in connection with those parents that don't have those resources to get their kids up to keep on that same level. I think we're going to have a real problem in the fall at the levels that kids are coming in at. And I think that's another issue that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, we will be ready in the fall to assess. If you're a fourth grader at the beginning of the year, we will be assessing children to know what content, where are the holes and gaps from the end of third grade year. So we are prepared for that as well. Again, I have as many positive, wonderful comments. And so I'm not negating that there are some people that are not having good experiences. And we appreciate very much when they've reached out to the principal and really let us know, because we've been able to modify and adjust in some of those circumstances. And it's helpful for us. And we've appreciated the input from the community. And we're probably in the fall, when we have a schedule, we're also going to have some parents who are going to want the schedule they have now, which is flexibility. So we may have some teachers who are still offering the flexible schedule because they do not want to be on a set schedule when the kids are at home. So again, this is one of those issues that You hear a different person, you hear something different from each person according to their experience. And some have been absolutely wonderful and some people have been frustrated, but you know, we're going to continue to work and grow. And now we know our kids have hotspots. Everybody can get on the internet. You know, we've done what we need to do to continue to prepare for September.
Tony, this is Peter Bernstein. So as we do approach the end of the year, I guess I would say, I hope all of the teachers are connecting with their kids prior to the end of the year, that there'll be live sessions. You know, I know we're not going to have in-class parties, but teachers that have not been on before, they really need to get on. I mean, it's tough enough for kids as it is, but I think the time is right where they really need to be meeting with the kids and saying goodbye, quite frankly.
Yeah, and I think, Peter, if parents aren't seeing that 60 minutes a week, reach out to the principal. So if if people know there's a teacher that we've already asked them at least 60 minutes a week. So if that's not happening for their children, let us know, because we want to give them the support if somebody's just nervous about it and we don't realize that they haven't been doing that. But the last couple of weeks, we've had that requirement to have more connection and make that next step.
Yeah, I guess I'm just hoping that the teachers are available to do that and close out the year for these students. I think it's really important.
Absolutely.
All right, I see Ms. Hirsch and Mr. Scher have their hands up again. I just want to know we've been at this close to 45 minutes or more. So if you could be concise, that would be great.
Well, I don't know which one of us you called on, so I'll just take a quick jump in. I was going to sort of say, it's not just the elementary school kids that are teaching themselves. It's, all the way up through high school. And I think part of these discussions are things that are going to be happening during the reopening committee's discussions as to how we plan for in-school, out-of-school pieces of this. And Tony, I just wanted to sort of point out, I know you just mentioned that parents are needing to see the 60 minutes a week, and we should be reaching out to our principals if we're not. Whatever guidance it is that you've sort of put out there for teachers, I don't know if we can create some kind of document that we can post or share with parents, because I'm not sure that all parents know that that there have been some minimums at least and maximums put out there. So if that's a possibility, that would be fantastic.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Mr. Scher, and then we're going to close this out.
My only comment was really to the 353 people who are listening in on this call. I heard great frustration amongst hundreds of parents that I've spoken to or who contacted me that, it's still banned by directive of the school system, direct instruction over the internet with students in a classroom setting. I realize we're in another place, and I'm glad the conversation is about what we're going to do in the fall. But it really surprises me because I'm hearing kind of someone say, it's all positive and there are some negatives. And it just isn't matching with what I'm hearing from parents. So maybe I'm just talking to nothing but, nattering nabobs of negativity. I don't think so, but it's distinctly possible. So I would like to encourage the PTAs, parents listening on the call, please send an email to the board telling us how you feel about the level of instruction that your students are getting, positive and negative, so that those of us who represent you have a complete picture of what your points of view are, and they can be taken in account as we close the year, move into the summer, but most importantly, they can be taken into account in any planning we have for next year. I want to hear from parents. I'm pretty certain all the other board members do too.
All right. With that, we're going to move on to our next item, which is a the 2020-2021 budget. So Tony, I'll let you kick that off, and then Kathleen, if you could be on deck to talk about the committee meeting the other day.
So the Finance Committee did meet the other day, and at that meeting, what I shared was basically that we have collaborated from all of our elementary principals, middle school principals, high school leadership, coordinators, and they really came together to say, what are some of the items that we could think about reducing in order to close this $4.5 million gap? Now, I will say that at the committee, that was part of the discussion is, should we be looking at 4.5 or are we looking at just the 3 million? Because we're definitely doing the interim, on July 1. And, if that's the case, then we'll try to close to 3, but we also have to be very cognizant that the interim, which, and this is more for the public, I know the board knows this, has to go through BET and RTM, and we really don't have any idea. If it didn't pass at the RTM, we'd still need to find the 1.5. So we're having to be very thoughtful about things like that. Also, when we look at what we can reduce, one item that comes up, anytime you're talking about budget reductions is just raise class size by 1, and in general education. First of all, we've already done that. And at high school, they feel like they do have some sections that are too large right now. But with COVID, we're actually having a conversation that it's going to have to be the opposite. So we need every teacher that, that we can keep that can teach a K-5 or a content area if we're going to have our doors open in September, and we are kind of at this phase level where we are now. So on the list, I ran through about 16 items, and I'll just mention what they were, because there were about 60 people on the Finance Committee meeting, which is really unusual for finance. So a coordinator position elimination, 2 AA, those are like a secretarial type positions across the district, supplementary funding, special education study funds. As the board remembers, the BET actually put 100,000 in capital to fund that study. So that meant we could take ours out of the budget to get it down. A software of $100,000, a downgrade of our assistant superintendent position, eliminating all new library books. And, given that people are nervous about touch, that's probably not a bad item to eliminate, considering people are nervous about just library books and high touch anyway. State and national travel, which that one we would expect because of COVID, most people aren't going to be going anywhere. And the next one is probably a harder one, and that is looking at foreign language in elementary school and reducing and not having foreign language in elementary school K2 and 3, except at JC where it's part of their magnet, in all 11 schools, and that's 3.8 FTE, 3.8 positions. Looking at the smart board replacements that are in the budget, there was about 240,000. We've shaved 100 off of that. But we want to make sure that, especially where teachers are using those interactive components, we have some boards that are truly end of life and we've got to replace them. So we couldn't completely cut that out. We also are looking at media assistants, and that would be looking at going from full-time to part-time in all 11 schools. Middle school Friday late buses, eliminating just the Friday bus. And in K-5, looking at eliminating second grade ALP. That's where it's just enrichment, and that would be 2.2 positions. Looking at eliminating 2 PE staff reductions, and that was 2.0 positions. And then we had another media assistant in secondary at 1.0. It's about 17 positions, certified and non-certified, when you look at where those would fall. And again, this is not my list as a superintendent. It's collaborative from all of our leadership saying, what are the things we could do without really hurting a program, but also trying to reduce the budget. And there's a 600,000 plug number that goes into this, assuming that something like the retirement that's on the agenda tonight could save us some money. And so there's not anything associated to that, but that's a plug number. And that gets us to 2.2 million by eliminating those items. And I did share with the committee that there are lots of other things that are on the list. One that was on every single group was return to original start time, because that had such a large cost at 1.2 million. Now, I've got that down on the bottom just so the board knew that it was coming up. And I will say with that item that we're not sure that that 1.2 million could actually be recouped now, because every year buses change, routes change. And given COVID, the busing is so up in the air. We just don't know enough about what buses would be next year, but I needed the board in transparency to know it was on the list. We've also added,
Hey, Tony, we're
What's that?
having a little bit of an issue with your audio. There's a bit of a background noise.
Oh, let me turn the air conditioner off.
That'll save a little money.
Okay, we'll see if this is better. Might be good. We're drowning this out anyway. So,
It may be you have some papers in front of you. You may be shuffling them near the microphone. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. No, that's all right. I'll hold my hand. So we also talked about, furlough day and plugged in a number for that. Again, those sorts of things, you have to go through the bargaining units. On the list was closing a school. That's, that was a consideration. But again, when you think about COVID, we need more space, not less. And so I think it's just in transparency, letting you know some of the items that were on there. So those really are the big items. There's also things like, canceling field trips and assured experiences. Those are going to be givens when we get into the fall if we have to, if we had to reduce some items. The challenge right now is, especially when you have an interim if we were going to request an interim for that 1.5 and we're not 100% sure that interim is going to get approved, then by BUT and RTM, we have to be really careful. What do we reduce? Because we reduced our professional development last year already, 700,000. And, I shared with the board when we were doing the budget this year to hit 2%. We didn't restore any of that. And I'm okay with that. I think our budget is okay, but I don't think we have more to go in and start cutting. And especially given, the long discussion we just had about distance learning, and we have to continue to support teacher professional development. Well, also on the list, we could cut more materials and supplies, but we already did that this year to get to the 2%. We had a 5% reduction. So, we're getting to the point we really don't have a lot to reduce to get to the magnitude of the number at 4.5 million. So those were suggestions. That's what they are. Ultimately, as you know, wherever we land, it's up to board discussion. So it was sharing with the committee that these are the recommendations from the administrative team that, collaboratively looked at what we could do in order to close this gap. So I might let Kathleen, she might want to share more about the meeting.
Yep, Ms. Stowe, go ahead.
Right, thanks so much. So yes, it was a well-attended meeting. I don't think we've ever had more than 5 people in the room at a finance meeting. So quite like we're preparing in the fall for maybe doing distance learning, maybe we should keep having committee meetings via Zoom so we have more of the public attend. But we obviously had the committee had a chance to preview it the other day. Thank you very much, Tony. And I know that you included so many members of your team to really roll up your sleeves and figure this out. I think there are obviously painful cuts. We wouldn't have expected anything less. We obviously had a lean budget before. So how are we going to find anything else? But obviously something that's going to be hard to do. So, but these are tough times, right? At the same time, so that we recognize. And I just think it's important for the community now to hear what we need to consider, since we have so many people from the public on, and they can obviously email us, and we've already received some emails because obviously people were listening at the finance committee the other day. I think this is kind of generally my attitude. We have to hope for the best, but plan for the worst. And that's kind of what we're doing here. So since I know Christina and Joe and I had a chance to really talk a lot about this the other day, I think that it'd be good for us to sort of open it up now to some of our other colleagues to give them a chance to ask questions and give a perspective, because I think we started that. So with that, thank you.
Thanks. I actually this is Peter Bernstein, I put my hand up because I did want to speak. So I wasn't able to attend the budget meeting earlier this week, but I did want to offer some thoughts on the concepts that were discussed. I do want to say first, welcome to Greenwich. It's home of one of the world's most vibrant rumor mills. So the latest rumor is I'm personally interested in rolling back start time as a cost-saving measure, and I know that was something that was discussed. Those sharing that rumor might want to consider the source of that, because having not been asked and knowing it was brought up by the administration, again, I didn't participate in the discussion. I wasn't there. I want to make sure to convey the message to both the superintendent and the community. I'm going to be clear. I am not in favor of rolling back start time as a cost-saving measure. I've not said that I was at any time since we took the original vote years ago. The decision to make start time change was a response to health concerns of our students. I don't see any reason to revisit that. That said, given COVID, if we had to run shifts during the day or something, I presume we would have that discussion about temporary adjustment to the school day, but I don't think I'm not ever going to be in favor of revisiting it as a cost-saving measure. More generally, I'm uncomfortable with the cuts proposed so far, but I'm going to recognize the reality. There's not going to be any comfort here. Changes to our programming and staffing are going to need to be made because we have to live within the budget that's available to us come July 1. I appreciate the effort to spread the items out across multiple areas so we're not entirely wiping programs out. And my presumption is this is a starting point, not an end. I think we're going to be talking about this for quite a while. I think I'll stop there, other than to say this budget was built basically last fall, as if we were going back to school in a regular sense. The reality is that's not happening. Obviously, things look different and have been planned for multiple scenarios. Really crazy. And thank you, Tony, for mentioning the special education review. So the BET did vote to put $100,000 in as opposed to the 60 we originally asked to make sure there'd be enough money. And they put it in capital because they didn't want it to get caught up in any operational moving of the money. So I did want to point that out and appreciate the BET for doing it. With that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Scher.
I'm glad we're trying to figure this out. As Kathleen said, you have to plan for the worst and hope for the best. As a guy who's been through, this will be my 10th BOE budget. I think I would add 5 things to the list, Tony, to be considered. And I've looked at these across areas and the number of the budget, and of the items I'm going to list, our total spending in these areas is $23 million. So I would hope we would be able to close our budget gap. The real number we're trying to cover is the raises that the unions are contracted for and have decided that they need to get for teachers and administrators. So I'm focused very much on closing that gap. And then the other 1.5 relates to special education. And I think that's a very solvable problem with the BET if we would actually work with them and collaborate with them. So I separate this into 2 buckets. You keep talking about 4.5, but it's really 3 million and 1.5 million, and they're 2 separate items. The 5 items are, I think we need to suspend programs that are not mandated by law and that can't show they impact positively academic achievement. One of them we're going to talk about tonight, which is summer school. I don't know that I want to eliminate summer school, but I think we need to look at it and whether or not inviting 1,000 children to it is the right thing. It's a very expensive program. We do have to do ESY. That is mandated, but that's different. I'd also suggest we look at what is called optional preschool, not mandated preschool, optional preschool. I think number 2, we have to look at administrative staffing. There are just luxuries we have in positions that are great to have in a school system that's as strong as ours, but we probably can't afford them going forward. Specifically, I think we need to look at assistant principals at our smaller elementary schools. We staff the same at a building that's 250 kids for one that's 500 kids. That's probably something we can't afford to do anymore. We need to look at the instructional coaches. They're a great thing to have, mentors for teachers for development, but they're really not probably affordable. We have a research manager position. It's great to have somebody to sit around and do statistics for us and do statistical analysis for us. But now that we've in fact shut off STAR, SBAC, and SAT, state and our own assessments, we're going to be in a data desert. So having that research position may not make so much sense. I think we also need to look at social workers and how much we have a duplicative social services department with the one that's in the town. There's probably an opportunity to collaborate and optimize with the town on that. Number 3 is IT devices. We issue an IT device to almost every student in the district. I will tell you, and I've talked to other parents, my daughter, one that was issued to her when she entered the high school, is sitting in a box in the bottom of her closet. It'll probably sit there for the next 3 years to only be returned because she's in fact using her own device. So we don't need to issue devices to everyone. We need to issue devices to kids who need them. Issuing to everybody is a wonderful luxury, but I'd like to see us cut there instead of cutting teachers in the classroom or increasing class size. Busing, which is number 4, is we're running 3 busing networks totally separately, one for special ed kids, one for the public school system, one for the private school system. We have an opportunity to tremendously optimize those networks. There's no reason private school kids can't run on a bus with public school kids. We need to hire a specialist in this, which we've done before, that saved us millions of dollars the last time we did this in optimizing our bus network. We should probably do it again. The last thing I'd like to see us do is consider, we have duplicative administrative departments with those in the town. We have an IT department and the town has an IT department. We have an HR department. The town has an HR department. We have a finance department. The town has a finance department. I think a conversation with the BET on opportunities, you're never going to go 1 + 1 = 1, but you could go to 1 + 1 might equal 1.8 and there are savings. All of these items are things that don't directly affect students in the classroom and don't affect teachers in the classroom and don't affect core educational programs. So I think the list you came up with is a great kind of list, but there's a much bigger list of a lot of things that people may not be aware of that we have as luxuries in the system. I'd love to keep them. Unfortunately, the teachers and the administrators are sticking to their guns that they must get raises starting July 1. That is our unfortunate reality. So I would hope we would look at these additional areas that don't impact students directly in the classroom.
If I could respond to some of those, just so that, because the community, we have a large.
Tony, why don't we put them on a list? Because it's clear the committee probably needs to meet again to talk about this continuing work. It doesn't make a lot of sense to debate them now.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't want to debate. I just would like to kind of run through a couple of them because we do have 341 people that are on, and I don't want them to think that we're not being, thorough in our work. So summer school, you'll hear when Dr. Carabillo talks, we've already adjusted summer school for the summer. It's going to look different this summer. We're only doing literacy and numeracy. Optional pre-K, I'll look at that. I don't understand that one, so I'll certainly go in and look at that because the pre-K is tied to special education. On the admin staffing, one of the challenges we have is if you don't have an assistant principal, is the number of PPTs that we have, again, for special education. And that's difficult for our principals, because then you don't have the principal available for actually discipline and other things that happen in the building. The instructional coaches, we've already moved all of our instructional coaches out. Next year, they are all math interventionists, and I think they're going to be really, really needed. They're already moved out to buildings. The research manager, that's not actually pulling like just data. Our research manager does, it probably needs a different name, runs all the back end on a ton of the instructional software that we have. Everything, you know, from STAR to when you're talking about uploading kids, especially for distance learning, all of the platforms your children are in, whether that be Seesaw, there's a ton of them, you know, all the ones that you've seen as parents. It's all the back end on all of those items as well. Social workers, the social workers, I think right now, from a district standpoint, we would be very nervous to cut a social worker. It's what we're needing for social emotional. And again, we can go in and certainly look at that. The IT devices are actually in the capital budget, not the operating. So we can certainly explore that from a capital standpoint, but it doesn't help bring the operating budget down. As far as the buses, we are already, and I have already planned. We have somebody that's working with us right now. The consultant started last summer. They're continuing with us, and we are consolidating, even like private schools that used to run separately. So that work is happening. And then when you look at combining the departments, you know, we look at that, and that's one reason we had a slide about all of the things that we do with the town of Greenwich in our budget, where we really do consolidate services. But when you look at it from an IT perspective, working with an 8-year-old is vastly different than, you know, working with a police department. And we don't see cost savings there because they've already been pared down. HR is very much the same way. Our HR people don't know anything about hiring, you know, police officers and all the requirements there. And from the town side, teacher certification especially is enormous. And so we did look at that as we were building the budget this year. Same way with finance. School finance is very, very different, and it needs an extremely high skill set to understand school finance, to make sure that not only our reporting structures are correct, but understanding even things like special education funding, how that flows. It's a very unique skill set. So I guess what I'm saying is some of those items we have looked at, and we did look at in building this budget, and we've made a lot of those reductions. So I want to share those, but I will certainly look at that pre-K piece for optional. I'm not sure what that means, but I'll go in and look at that.
I would just say, Tony, I didn't do this in a vacuum. In our budget, which is published, every single one of the areas I listed has a budget this year the same or higher. So I think, you know, I understand all of your objections, and I just think I would hope that we would, this is a time, unfortunately, where we need to go back, check all of our assumptions, check all of our sacred cows, and unfortunately probably make some harder decisions. But, you know, that's my contribution to the conversation, doing 10 of these budgets in Greenwich Public Schools. I realize this is your first one and knowing these departments, but take it for what it's worth.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. And I think, you know, you hit on some things. I just wanted you to know we're already doing them. That when we built the budget, you know, October, November, there were things I didn't know for sure about the district. And we have really spent some time, I have personally, trying to make sure I do understand where we're staffed. And that's why, like, those positions and instructional coaches, they would still be sitting in the budget because the budget was built so early, but we don't have them next year. And I, you know, when I informed the board that we were moving those positions back out to the classroom, they're now classroom, you know, math interventionists. So I just wanted people on the call to realize that the things you're mentioning are spot on, and they're actually what we're doing right now. And you wouldn't see a line item change on that because we built the budget so early in the year that even as we're working to consolidate the routes, they'll be working on that all the way through the summer. Thank you.
All right. I do want to just add, we during our day with the BET Budget Committee, we did spend a lot of time talking about the work that gets done with the town and the possibility of consolidating. And in fact, went back for another day specifically to have the conversation about IT that involved both Tom Klein, who's the town IT director, as well as Mike Ting. And the result of that discussion was there's a great working relationship. Those things are different. We'll stay the course. So that has been looked at. With that, Megan, you might be muted.
I can't hear 100%, so hopefully let me know if you can hear me. Just cut out just now. But basically all of these things that are mentioned, we're talking about cutting services that absolutely affect our students and our educators. We've already cut our budget down to the bone. It's basically a skeleton. And now we're talking about cutting off the skeleton's feet and it's hobbling along. So these cuts are devastating, and they absolutely affect our students and our educators and the classroom.
All right, Ms. Hirsch.
Thank you. I sat and I listened to the budget committee's meeting, and I truly haven't been able to sleep a wink since. And I wanted to sort of echo Mr. Bernstein in saying I do appreciate that when you looked at a lot of these things, you looked at across the board in different types of programs to make sure that any reductions that we might be able to make would only be a small percentage and spread out across a lot of different areas so as to not lose a particular program. I think the biggest concern that I have is probably mirrored by many members of the board and public. And we have been asked to make these reductions for so many years, and we have consistently said that they're not sustainable for the long term if we want to see growth in our students and our academics and our programs. And we're hitting the long term now. The idea that we've gone into distance learning with little to no funding for professional development and curriculum development, which is what we're going to be doing again going into next year, scares me. I know that you're really driving the ship here, and I appreciate that. The one comment I would make is I know when the discussion came up about reversal in school start times, I think it's far too early to sort of even broach those subjects until we really know what our schools are going to look like next year. You even touched upon it. We may need to completely revise how our schools, schedules look, starting earlier, going later, revising how our days function in general. So I'd really like to make sure that we don't put that forward at this point until we really have a better idea of how our schools will be running in the fall. And if we need to take up something in that regards, then I think that would be a much smarter way to look into this as I think we are focused on the student health and well-being. And this is certainly an area that touches upon that. I'd also like to say, in regards to what Mr. Scher was saying, I think every single one of these reductions, like Megan said, will affect our students and our educators in one way or another. And I would say in no uncertain terms, the suggestion to reduce social workers, I cannot wrap my brain around it. We are going into a period of time now where students are dealing with things in their homes that they have never had to deal with before. The levels of stress and anxiety, you hear it across the country, the levels of abuse, things that are happening. We need our social workers now more than ever. And they're not just there to support our students, they're there to support our educators. So I would hesitate to add that to a list of things to sort of to look at. But I appreciate the thought that you put into this. I know I had reached out to you earlier with a suggestion of some other possibilities, and I think I'll hold on to that discussion as a possible revenue stream until we do a little bit more deep digging and research to see if it's something that the board might be interested in broaching as a subject via policy. I know I'd asked you a bunch of questions, and until we have some of those answers, I will put a pin in that unless it comes up in a little bit.
All right, Ms. Downey.
Tony, as I said during our budget meeting the other day, thank you. Or I may have not said it. I know this is gut-wrenching and a horribly difficult process for you to manage, and I applaud your concept of going to all of the administrators at all the different schools, the people on the front lines, who really understand the needs of the students and the buildings. And like, for example, the notion of no Friday late bus, right? They're the ones who realize that's not getting utilized, and finding ways to achieve the cuts and like others have said, this is going to have impact on our students and on our staff. And we're simply at this point trying to minimize the impact. I think that's really what we have to look at. It's kind of like the least bad scenario that we could possibly have. And obviously, with not knowing what school's going to look like in the fall, we don't know what, the process of making these decisions. I know Peter or Kathleen will talk about this at the end of the discussion about how the board and how we're going to be able to make these decisions, because it's a constantly evolving situation. And one of the, another thing, like, for example, if we're not back in school, if we're virtually learning, I think we should be looking at other savings. I mean, obviously, if it winds up being distance learning, for example, we'd obviously be able to save a lot on transportation. But if there were other things we could find savings, I think we we're playing with the numbers here. For example, if we're not back in school, we can't have athletics. So what are the costs of our athletic programs in the fall? I think we have to really be looking, kind of in different tranches of which way it's going to go, because I think it's hard to envision that it's going to be completely normal. Yeah. So where we can find savings in ways, not because we want them, but because it's going to be foisted upon us by the distance learning or social distancing, may help alleviate the problems. I don't know if you have any thoughts on if that's too much for you to do, to kind of think in that direction, in addition to just saying, all right, what do we have to cut? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it is all part of the thought process whenever you're having to look at where to reduce. The challenge is, it is all of the unknowns. If this was a normal, budget year, it's hard anyway. It's hard on any given year to try to look for this magnitude, but it's especially hard with COVID, because if we are, let's say we're in school for 2 weeks and then we're out of school for 2 weeks. I mean, that's one of the scenarios that they're saying, that's what it could look like. It's going to be very expensive when we're in school. So we could try to calculate the cost of the additional, we have to clean twice a day. We have to clean the bathrooms twice a day. What are the adjustments we're having to make to how we run the buses? All of those things that we're discussing right now, that the cost of running school with COVID is going to be expensive. So then if we go to, and you switched for a week or two, you're going to have some savings by not running your utilities, not running the buses, unless of course there's an executive order that says we still have to pay for buses. So, because that's what happened this year. So if it's a weird year, we may not have the same savings we would think in order to keep the busing going during the year. So, it's like you could have a really expensive week and a week that's not. And we're going to have a week with a ton of overtime, and then a week where, you don't have overtime. It's just kind of basic disinfecting. So that's the hard part, is not knowing really what's going to happen, because the expenses are vastly different on those three scenarios. And obviously, if we just did distance learning, but if we did distance learning, that's where you would have the most cost savings, because you're not in your buildings.
But like, what can we as a board do to help this process along? I mean, obviously the budget committee has already met once, we'll meet again, but what else can we do to assist in the process?
So when I've had to go through reductions in the past, the chart that I sent you out, just so you could see what it looks like, that's actually built in Excel. And so generally what I have done is you're getting all of these collective ideas, and the board is able to really look at, because you're really building to a number. You've got to build to 3 million, and where that's going to come from. And it's finding consensus among the board on what are those difficult decisions that we can live with. So, when you look at something like, I'm going to say world language, maybe the board's split, or maybe the board's not. Some of these other items, if we're looking at a concept to generate revenue, how does the board feel about that? And then you can add items to that maybe weren't on the table. And when you come back together, you do gain consensus that way because everybody's working off of the same template, off of the same kind of format. And I've even in the past taken that same template and then lined up all 8 board members so that when you have a working session, you can see what are the things that some people put down at the bottom is, no, this is like third, I don't want to touch it, like start time, which isn't on the list, by the way. It's just sitting at the bottom. But what are the items that are pretty consistent at the top that people feel like, okay, this is the best of a bad choice, but these are the items we can live with. So there is, I think, a process that we can go through where it's collaborative for, all 8 of the board members to have a difficult conversation.
Well, to that end, Peter, I guess we're going to have to put back to meeting planning and agenda planning when we get down the road. We're going to probably have to have a board meeting. And Kathleen, I think we talked about that at our meeting. That's purely budget related, correct?
And where time is of the essence. Teachers need to get their contracts. They we can't start July 1 and not have done this work. And June's going to go really, really quickly, especially with how busy everyone's going to be with activities. But time is of the essence because, there are 17 positions on this list. And even if that was whittled down to 5 or that's whittled down to 10 by making other choices, we have to let those people know. So it's challenging.
And on that list, let me just ask you, out of the 17 positions, but the media assistant ones, are they GEA or are they which union are they with?
Shemaine may know that better than me.
They're GMEA.
GMEA.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I see Ms. Kowalski.
Sure. So one of the things that I don't think that's been said, but I think we all know this is, look, if we were able to, and we're not, be able to put a freeze on all pay increases for teachers and administrators, we would pretty much be at our goal. And it wouldn't affect any student or any activity that they have or any of the resources. One of the things that I think we also need to consider is, I know we have 17 positions on the list, but what other positions, what do layoffs look like, and how do we manage that if we have to go down that path? We haven't talked about it. I don't want to really talk about it. Nobody wants to put anybody out of work, but it is something that we as a board need to take a very hard look at and consider as to whether it makes sense to have other positions on this list in order to not affect certain resources that our children have. I mean, obviously cutting teachers does affect the direct resources because it takes a teacher out of a classroom, but it's one of the things that we haven't really mentioned on this list, and I think we need to take a hard look at the positions. What are our legal abilities as a board for purposes of layoffs, what those look like, what positions would that look be on that list, and what type of money does that free up?
When you say the type of positions, can you give an example what you mean by that?
Sure. Is it last in, first out type of a position? Is it administrative positions or teacher positions? What are the types of positions based upon the contracts that we are bound by? Would there be ability to propose layoffs in order to meet our budget deficits?
So basically the list that I read off in those positions, that's really what you're talking about. It's layoff. Okay. It's policy wise, it's called a reduction in force, and how those are handled are driven by the contracted agreements. There are certain things we have to do. For instance, like seniority. is generally one of the drivers when you go to look at that. Sometimes it's certification that goes along with that, but it's definitely a challenging process that it takes a lot of time to be very thorough because you have to pull everybody's date of hire, things of that nature, but it's very contractual.
No, I'm sure it's contractual. It's tedious. It's overwhelmingly difficult. But I think obviously that's something that we as a board need to consider what possibilities there are in that regard.
Yeah, no, we're doing
Yeah,
that.
and I'm not saying that's what we do. I'm saying it's something to add to the list that we need to look at and evaluate from a numbers perspective. What makes sense, right? Where we're throwing stuff out on the list of things to negotiate. And this is obviously not something that anyone wants to do, but it's something we need to consider as to what those numbers look like and doing so, how does that affect our kids? And those are questions we need to ask and look at, and that needs to be on the table.
So I guess I just, because I'm taking notes of what everyone is sharing. So I'm genuinely trying to understand the question. So the 17 positions that I read off, those are layoffs. I mean, that's what it is. We call it reduction in force. Yeah, and who actually those people would be is very much determined by the bargaining process. And you pull out the agreement, you make sure we follow step by step the way that you have to determine, if you have 10 people, out of those 10, who are the 5 that get reduced or get reduction in force?
Yeah, so I guess my question, Tony, sorry, and I don't mean to cut you off, is there are only 17 positions in all of the teachers that are potentially subject to a reduction in force pursuant to the contracts.
The 17 positions that are on here are different. They're, a media assistant is not a teacher.
Right.
Yeah, so
that's what I'm at. So my question is, are there others that we should be looking at other than the 17 that are for potential reductions in forces?
Well, I said initially, and I'm only at 2.2 million and 600,000. I've got a plug number in that. So originally I said, I think it will take about 30 positions across the district in order to hit, this number. It's a very, very big number. So if, we have something like this retirement that the board's talking about tonight, and we're able to have some cost savings from something like that, it's going to help tremendously save positions, if something like that works. But if it doesn't, then yes, we'll have to go deeper because I'm only at 2.2 million. We have this list that I gave you doesn't even close the gap.
Yeah, and I have one other question for you, Tony. So when we are thinking, when we're going through these budget checks, are we looking at peer communities, and are you being able to talk to other superintendents across the state to determine how they're handling other similar budget situations?
Absolutely. I mean, we have a superintendent's group that meets, monthly. Some of the localities aren't going through this. If you ask the Westport superintendent, he thinks they're funded fine. They ended up with over 3%, and he feels like their district was funded. If you ask Fairfield, they will say their budget is okay. They've had minimal reduction. And then they also, because our benefits sit on the town side, they got credit for the cost savings in insurance. So it depends on how your district is structured, because like for Greenwich, we'll probably have about 800,000 savings in the insurance change that they're making at the state level, but it doesn't sit in our operating budget, it sits on the town side. So we're all a little bit different in how our budgets are structured, but the districts that are having to really go in and do what we're doing, it is really turning over kind of every stone and looking at, every position. And again, trying to make sure we also get that feedback from the principals who know their buildings and, can kind of speak to what's happening, at the building level. So yes, there's a lot of collaboration, but and we're comparing, what is one program look like in this district versus another that has a similar demographic.
All right, Mr. Scher.
I was going to go back to the question on process that I think Christina was talking about. as you know, I'm exceptionally angry about this situation. And, you know, some people want to pick on the BET. I'm exceptionally annoyed that the union leadership, and I don't think it's the rank and file, I don't think it's the teachers, I think it's the leadership, have refused to help us in any way with this problem. Just so we're all know what we're talking about. Okay, a principal is paid $176,000. The president of the principals union also has someone else in her household who is also a principal. They will be taking home $350,000 from Greenwich Public Schools this year, and their raise will be $10,000 collectively. So we're now faced with going and looking for positions so that someone like that can get an additional $10,000 raise in the middle of a depression. It's beyond stunning what we're actually talking about. But from a process perspective, okay, Tony, I think with people reductions, we need to, someone told me long ago, CFO of Fortune 500, major on the majors, don't major on the minors, okay? If we need to close a budget gap, we need to go where the money is. And the money is in these higher order positions. It doesn't make any sense to go, as an example, to library assistants or special education assistants or other assistants that are lower cost employees, because we just need to take more of them out. We need to go look at our high cost talent, and we need to go look at that and say, where can we cut back? I'll give you an example. You talked about the instructional coaches. You turned them into math interventionists. Many of those people are at the top of our wage scale at $112,000 per person next year. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me to get rid of 3 library assistants when we're talking about one person. So I think from a process perspective, I'd like to see a little more focus on some of the positions that are, as I said earlier, luxuries, love to have them, love to keep them. I would love the unions to come to the table and say, we'll forego raises and we keep every single employee we have. That's my preferred outcome, but they've refused, so we're in this position. So I think the other thing we have to do from a process perspective is break this down into 3 parts. You don't eat an elephant all at once. We need to fix our budget, assuming we are going to normal reopen schools in September. We need to get that budget solidified. So that becomes essentially our baseline. Then what we can do is go to the BET, okay, because they've indicated that they will help us on things other than that baseline budget. They have said very clearly, if we can provide a much greater transparency regarding the $1.5 million that we're requesting for out-of-district placements and legal settlements in special education, that they will consider that on an interim basis. They have said that. I'm one of the liaisons. There's other liaisons here to the BET. They have been crystal clear on that point. The other thing that they have been crystal clear about is if you wind up having other expenses, which you've been rattling off tonight, potentially, that are COVID specific, that were not related to the normal educational program that is our baseline, they will consider looking at those on an interim basis. So instead of dealing with this in one big giant blob, we need to break it down and get kind of our core baseline budget solved. And then we should look at the special education requests separately. And then we should come up with a scenario based on the 3 plans that you have. We're going to have the baseline of what it's going to cost if we reopen. Then you have to develop with Sean the 2 other scenarios, the hybrid and the other COVID costs. And then I think we can go back and have a very calm, informed, unemotional conversation with the BET, bringing them back into being the partner that they have historically been, then getting off of this incredibly confrontational position that has developed over the last month or so. Now, I know Sean, he was trained where I was at IBM. I have ultimate confidence that he knows how to deal with this level of complexity. This is normal in large corporations. He knows how to deal with this. He brings his expertise to our school system. I'm really confident that we can figure this out and come up with the scenarios and the recast budgets pretty quickly. I'm talking 30 days or less, so we can go re-engage with the BET if that's needed.
If I may, just a couple of items. First of all, I hear what you're saying, and we hear what the BET is saying, but my understanding is we also have to go to the RTM, and we don't know how that interim would play out. But my understanding is I think there is will of the board that we are going to put an interim to forward. And I think, we've all repeated that. I know Peter Bernstein has, Sean has, we've said that. The other thing I just want to reiterate is that you can't go in and just look at somebody who's on the top salary and say, we're going to cut a principal. These are the people that are the heartbeat of those schools, especially during.
Tony, that's not what I said. Please don't characterize it that way.
Okay,
Tony speaking.
Yeah, and I just, I also, to the 2 people that you referenced, because there are people on here that know who those principals are, that have done wonderful work for us. They should not have to apologize, for having a salary that is a professional salary in a professional community. I think there are people that do understand that when you've spent years in school and you've really honed your craft and you've worked your way up in whatever profession, you earn a professional salary. So I just, they may very well be listening tonight, and I just think they need to hear that. And I also want to just note that we're not cutting special ed assistants. I know you mentioned that, but I don't want our special education community to think that we're cutting special education resources. And I also just want to remind that we did, coming into this budget, we cut the assistant to our deputy for her help. So we're sharing. We cut our assistant director of HR. We've cut our assistant director of food service. We've also downgraded one of our administrative positions. So we've done all of this on our own before we were in this budget situation. So we are very aware that we're trying to run as efficient and have respect for this community as much as we can. Thanks.
Mr. why don't you see if you can bring us home on this?
Yeah, okay, great. Tony, first of all, some people are referred to you about being new to Greenwich. What I take away is that your wealth of knowledge and experience from previous communities and is shining through. And I mean, when you talk about all of us getting into sitting in a room and going through the Excel spreadsheet in detail, that is because you've done this before and you've been in situations, probably not quite like this before, but in tough situations. And I thank you, and that's why we hired you, and I feel so good that you're here guiding us. So now let's go to process. We very clearly need to have another budget meeting. I know Joe, Christina, and I had one where we met last week and we were able to attend and some of the public. I think we need another one. And in terms of process, I think it makes sense because it's coming up shortly. We're going to be talking about retirement. And, assuming that is something that we all agree on, those numbers, there's a range, right? And we won't know what the number actually is. And since it is a big mover, potentially, I think we should actually have that number in hand, and then we could sort of figure out, the net. So given that, my understanding, having read the materials, is that June 1st is when we would know that information. So I think that June 2nd, we have a budget committee meeting, and 336 attendees. I hope that you join us at our budget committee meeting because it's so fun to actually have people there. So we do that on June 2nd. And then, Peter, we have a board meeting on June 4th. So hopefully we come out of that budget committee meeting with some recommendations and we can make some decisions on June 4th. That's my suggestion. I turn it to you, Peter, and see if that makes any sense.
Yeah, so just to dovetail onto that, yes, our next scheduled board get together is June 4th, and then beyond that, June 18th. As I said earlier, I think we're going to probably need to meet with a little more frequency. And the last scheduled meeting is June 18th. I don't think that's going to hold. I think we're going to need to add. I think the timing on that is probably right. Obviously, check with your committee members afterwards on the 2nd. We should have an indication of what the retirement group would look like if we move forward with that. And then, we can meet on the 4th and we can always schedule another meeting between the 4th and the 18th if needed. So I don't think there's anybody on the board that's not willing to roll their sleeves up and get to work. So with that, Tony, Sean, entire administrative team, thank you for your hard work and your heavy lift. I hate to say this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship, and we're going to keep working on this and hopefully get some clarity. And I do want to point out, the idea of dealing with this in 3 categories is obviously is attractive, right? We need to deal with the budget as it is. We obviously need to look at that special education gap, and then COVID, right? We really don't know what that back to school is going to look like. And given that you're planning for the multiple scenarios, I think we're going to have to be agile. We're going to have to be flexible. We're dealing with a 3-dimensional chessboard, so everybody be ready to work on that. With that, we'll move on to our next item, which is the facilities update. So Dr. Jones, I'll let you kick that off.
Thank you. I'm just going to mention a couple of items on here. First of all, just so that everybody knows, Field 6 and 7 is full steam ahead. They are moving all the turf. That work is going well. Ham Avenue is getting ready to get started there. I know that Dan was on a meeting today about Ham Ave, so that's moving forward. We've also been able to do starting to look at some of the security aspects with cameras and wiring because the buildings are closed. So we're able to get in a little bit earlier this year than we normally would. Our JC Ed Spec, if you're on that committee, I halted that just a little bit once it was pulled out of the budget. We do have another draft, but I just set it aside while we were working on COVID sort of items since it didn't have the same sense of urgency. And I know that we are on track with our consultant to have that reimbursement forms that people had asked about, in by June 30th. Those projects are also right where they should be. And I'll be starting in this next week or two, assuming that the funding goes through for feasibility for OG, we'll have that RFP ready to go. So that's just a quick update, and I'll leave it there.
So Tony, I can ask this now, or I can wait till we get to the finance report. But basically, I know there are no outstanding items left from 2017 or earlier. 2018 items are a very minimal subset now. Are we able, now that the buildings are closed, to close out those 2018, 2019 items?
That would be a better question probably for Dan and for Sean to answer exactly where we are on those projects. Some of them have money that's been encumbered, and they're doing the projects, but there's the money still encumbered. So until it's finished, they can't close it out completely finished.
Understood.
I'll just mention, as far as 2018 goes, we're down to, I think, about $2.5 million in that vicinity. So that's come down quite a bit. We've eliminated all of the 15 and 16 and 17. And, we've cut it down overall from a portfolio by $10 million in the last 5 months, 5-6 months. So we are making a lot of headway. But with COVID, it did kind of limit things to outside type of tasks, less interior work. But we're continuing to work it.
Great, thank you. I truly appreciate that. Anybody else have any questions about facilities updates? All right, not seeing any hands, we will move on to summer school. So Dr. Jones.
I'm actually going to turn it over to Dr. Carabillo so she can jump right into the document that was posted and share how summer school will look this year.
Okay, thank you. So I sent you a document of where we are right now with our school planning. To add to that summer school planning, what we have done is that we are now scheduling that 90 minutes for literacy for the K-8 students and the 60 minutes for math. What we want to do is to make sure that the students have that face-to-face contact with their teacher that they will have, and we hope to be able to have teachers that are familiar with the students. Hopefully they will apply for the positions, and then we'll be able to really make those deeper connections, because it's very hard with summer school having kids with new teachers, but sometimes that's exciting too, because it's a different face, it's a different way of learning. So we're looking forward to that. We do have a job description which really shows the changes that we are doing with our summer school teachers. So Michael, if you want to put that up, I think that that will explain a little bit more about what our summer school is going to be looking like. So we posted this today and we talked about the distance learning and how it's really changed what we do with our kids. And this year we've asked the teachers to demonstrate their competence with distance learning based on their experiences that they've had since March 16th. We are, Shemaine and I will be looking at their experiences. We've asked them to invite us into one of their live teaching sessions between the time that this closes, which I believe is next Friday, so that we have an opportunity the following week to see what the teachers are doing. Some of the teachers we know, and we've seen some of the work that they've done. Other teachers we have not. So they really are going to have to show us that they are competent in distance learning and that they have done live teaching with the kids. So all of the teachers will have to do at least half of their class will have to be live teaching. They will need to make sure that they are doing an opening meeting with all of the students, and then wrap up the last 5 or 10 minutes of the class. We feel this is really important to develop those relationships with our students, who are the ones that are the most struggling for K-8. The high school or secondary students that will be doing acceleration or credit recovery, they will be doing their distance learning with the teachers. And that should be up tomorrow for the secondary students to start to register. This year, again, we focused on those students who had challenges with reading. That is our focus, but we also decided that we would offer to the parents math if they wanted their children to do that too. So far, we've gotten about, I think, 42 registrations, and the majority of the parents want their children to do both literacy and numeracy. So you'll see the responsibilities that we've put on the teachers that will be doing summer school, and the knowledge and the skills that we want them to be able to demonstrate. So that's my quick update. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them for you.
Ms. Hirsch.
Well, you answered at least one of my questions, but I know that you mentioned that in order to qualify for this, we know there's students who may not have otherwise have had issues accessing their education prior to this, but are now struggling with distance learning. And some of these students are also having difficulty engaging and burning out. So I just wanted to say, I know you guys are doing more of a hybrid model, and I think that that'll be fantastic. So I'm hoping that there will be ways for students to re-engage. But I wanted to see what you might have put up for other benchmarks, other than just looking at the Winter Star, because a lot of these students, we need to catch the students who might be struggling now. So is there anything to put in, and for those students who may not be meeting their benchmarks, to offer them invitations due to distance learning?
We don't have any of that data to be able to make those decisions, because what we did was we based it upon where they were in January. We believe that if they were struggling in January, K-8 for literacy, for reading, that they probably still are struggling.
Okay, I was only asking because I know that, you know, not every student's really been able to access distance
Correct.
learning in the same manner, and those are students whose gap may be widening.
Right.
So I don't know if there's been any reach out to some of the educators to see if there are students that they have seen take a seriously large dip to try to support them as well. That's kind of where I was going.
If we have enough room and the appropriate number of teachers for students that have registered and we feel we can take more, then we would open it up.
Thank you, because I know that that's going to be a big piece for us. And I just wanted to see if you could give us a little bit, you mentioned blended learning. I know you're going to be talking about synchronous and asynchronous. And just for a lot of those individuals who are listening and parents who are interested in doing some of the summer school programs, can you just give us a little description of what you're considering blended learning? Because they may not know what that means.
Blended learning would be having the live teaching. It could have some videos. It could have independent work for students. It could be having an assignment from the teacher to pass in and do, and then get feedback on that. So it's a combination of everything. So that's why it's blended. It's not all in front of the computer. It's going to be some paper and pencil work, perhaps. It could be working in groups, perhaps. We'll see what that becomes.
Perfect. Thank you so much for giving that little descriptor.
You're welcome.
So Anne, I want to say thank you for making lemonade out of lemons. For years, we have been trying to get the district to re-envision summer school. This has given you the opportunity for a real live pilot.
Yep.
When students come for literacy, they were having a complete school day, not as much literacy as they should have been getting. Same goes for math. So I will be really interested to see how you're going to measure success and growth over this summer, and whether this is truly a model for going forward, because I think this is a step in the direction I think some of us have been asking for a while.
We'll have some information from Lexia, but we won't know until we determine what we're going to do when we come back in the fall to have an addition.
I guess it would be helpful to figure out what your pre and post screener look like. But
Right.
That's something you're.
And we'll do that with Lexia.
Okay, great. All right, Ms. Kowalski.
Sure, thanks. So the program is going to be based upon 90 minutes of literacy work and 60 minutes of math. Is that consistent for the is that the entire day's program?
Correct.
Is the 150 minutes?
Yeah.
And how many students are we able to offer the summer program for?
We hope many, but we don't know how many students will be registering. We have sent
Okay.
invitations out to, I know I forgot to write that down, a large number of students.
Okay, so it was based upon, so we sent out invitations, so if we sent out the invitations based on the hypothesis that if all of them accepted, we could give them a spot.
Hopefully, yes. Hopefully we have enough teachers that are going to be interested in teaching in this blended learning environment for summer school.
Okay. So there's a little bit of the unknown with respect to the number of students that will yet apply and come and the number of teachers we are able to hire for this.
Correct. And the K-8 is very different. Those are the students that are invited and recommended. But the 6 through 12 are students who choose to do the acceleration or they need to do credit recovery. So depending on how many of them register for the courses, it makes a difference as to how many teachers we hire.
Okay. And for those for the acceleration or credit issues, will they also have live content learning?
Exactly the same. Minimally half of the class that they have, that they're assigned to, and the times are different for each class, they will have minimally half of that time will be live teaching.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
right, seeing that there's no further questions on summer school, thank you, Dr. Carapello. We will move on, and the next item is a discussion about the strategic plan. When we last talked about this, the committee had done some work, but basically due to COVID, we were taking a pause. And what I wanted to do is get a sense from the board as to directionally how we want to deal with the fact that our current plan expires at the end of this year. One of the possibilities that comes to mind is to basically extend it. We could do that for a set time period or indefinitely, but I think overall, you know, it's better to have those goals in place as we move forward than to move forward without them. So I just want to throw that open for discussion. We're obviously not taking any votes on this tonight, but I do think we need to offer some direction on this. Not seeing any hands. Ms. Hirsch.
I was going to say, as a member of the committee, I know that, you know, we were starting to move forward. I think it is probably in the best interest, you know, for all of us if we extend it by a year, but I definitely think that there should be a deadline. Otherwise, you know, we really just need to sort of be able to focus and have an end goal of a date so that we can really put things into place. I know we've been a little bit sidetracked because there's a lot of unknowns at the moment, but I think it's a perfect opportunity for us to sort of take a deep dive back in. But as long as we have an end date, you know, a due date, I should say, I think that would be the best strategy. I mean, since you asked for input.
Nope, definitely ask for input. Anybody else on this? Other members of the committee? I think Karen, Peter. Not sure if you have a sense. Peter, I think you're unmuted, so if you want to go ahead.
No, I didn't even know we were taking this item up, so I hesitate to jump in because I don't know what we're doing here, but it's okay. Just
well,
keep going.
Our plan, well, the plan expires at the end of the year, so I don't know if you want to pull the committee back together to have a discussion about steps forward in terms of extending it, you know, letting it die. We're trying to figure out what to do with that. So.
Oh, okay. Sorry, this is the first time I'm hearing that. Yeah, we can do that. I'll take responsibility to get that done.
Great, thank you. All right, so we'll take that up. I'll add that to the agenda planning, but we should take that up in short order just so we have a North Star direction. All right, with that, we will. Our action items. First action item is Western Middle School. Given that it's an action item, why don't we take a motion to put that onto the table? Would somebody like to make the motion? There's a recommended motion on the cover sheet.
I'm happy to make the motion.
Go ahead, Joe.
Approve artificial turf be installed on the Western Middle School field as the approach for the remediation action plan.
And is there a second for that?
Karen Hirsch, I'll second that.
Is there a second? All right, with that, Dr. Jones, we'll turn it over to you for discussion.
Yes, Ryan Wilstrom is from Langen, is on tonight, and so he's here to answer any questions. There was also the Q&A document, just making sure everybody knows that was posted on board docs from the questions that the board submitted. So Ryan, I'll let you actually take questions.
All right, so board members, if you want to raise your hands if you've got questions. All right, Ms. Kowalski.
Sure. So I think my understanding is that there is the issue between turf and grass, and thinking that turf may in fact be faster component of it by going with a 1 foot reduction and turfing it would be faster in getting the kids back on the field. I want to understand if that's an accurate assessment. My understanding would be that with that 1 foot and a cap with turf requires a variance, and so we're actually removing less than what would otherwise be statutorily required given the amount of toxic material that lies in the field. So the question is, would that necessarily be the quicker option versus, because we would have to wait for the state to approve that. So are we working on the right? So the question is, are we working on the right assumption that that is the faster option?
Hi, this is Ryan Woolstrom with Langen. When we've historically talked about the timing for each of the remedial alternatives, we're talking in dates of when you start construction and when you are demobilizing from the site. So the days that we previously discussed in those slides that we've presented, that's mobilizing to the site and demobilizing to the site. It does not include regulatory approval timing for each of those alternatives. With the exception of the removal of 4 feet of fill and the replacement of 4 feet of clean, any of the strategies that are being considered would involve some sort of variance with the state.
And what is the general time frame that you have with your experience in getting these types of variances? Let's say we voted tonight on the top cover, whether it's sod or turf, and we move forward with that. When do you, and we put in the right material, how long would it take us to get in front of the state for approvals, and how long would it take to get that variance?
It's a good question. So I would say that prior to the high schools getting the high school approval for getting 6 and 7 approved with that variance, there has not been a school site in the state that has had a PCB remediation project approved with that variance. So the high school is the first project in the state to have done this. We're hopeful.
Sorry, go ahead. We're hopeful.
We're hopeful that now that the state and EPA have come together and approved that plan, it'll be simpler for Western Middle School to get a similar strategy approved. That being said, there will be an approval and public comment period process for each of these alternatives that will take months to get through.
And just as a reminder, how long did it take to get the variance at the high school?
I am not in a position to really answer that, considering we weren't the lead on that.
No,
and I didn't mean
to put you on. Yeah, I didn't mean to put you on the spot. I just was curious.
Yeah, and then your initial question started off with, it would be quicker to do turf compared to grass. I would say that it's quicker from the sense that if you select a turf remedial strategy, and that both EPA and the state approve a 1 foot cut is acceptable for turf, you're going to save time on the remediation aspect of the strategy, meaning you're only moving 1 foot compared to 2 or deeper. So you're going to have a significant reduction in days, time on site to remove the fill. However, once the fill is removed, the installation for a turf field is longer than the installation of grass. You're just bringing on topsoil and planting. However, there's also a grow period for some of the grass strategies that would be potentially implemented here.
Yeah, and I had a question on the grass strategy. Like, for example, I think you said something with respect to if we laying sod, which is grass already grown that they lay down versus throwing down seed and then hay on top of it. You said the grow season on that would still be, if it went in September, would still be till April. I'm just not seeing that otherwise. Are we, and maybe I'm mixing sod and grass growing together, but that just seemed like a really long time.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Sure. So I had previously asked the question about the time period, this growing season for sod, right? So, and I think the answer to the question is if we laid it down, I thought what was said, if we laid the sod in September, no one would be able to use the field in April. And I'm challenging that by saying that seems to be a growing season for seed as opposed to sod taking hold and being able to use.
Understood your question. I would say that I don't remember saying that. We have not evaluated the growing seasons for the different sods. So if you want, I could maybe talk to one of our internal landscape architects and give you a more well thought out response to that question.
Okay. And the benefit, I'm struggling here to fully understand the benefit of voting tonight for turf versus sod. I feel like we're skipping a step, right? As opposed to what remedial steps we need to take in order to then decide how we're going to cap it. So I feel like we're putting the cart before the horse here. And I don't fully appreciate why we're making a decision tonight on turf versus sod, as opposed to what remedial efforts would need to be taken in order to take the next step forward. So could you put some color on that for me?
Yeah, I think one of the logical next steps for the Western Middle School is to meet again with EPA and DEP to get their consensus on a path forward. For that discussion, they've asked a number of times for what is the restoration plan for the site and if turf or grass is proposed. The difference between turf and grass being as a final surface cover has a drastic effect on what the remediation plan will be for the site. So
Why? Yeah, I guess I didn't get that from the 1 through 6 options that we were looking at that had a dramatic effect as to the remediation component. It looked to me, and according to our last meeting, it really didn't make a difference whether it was sod or turf. It was the matter of lowering the PCB levels to an appropriate level and then capping it really required the amount of soil that you were removing as opposed to the capping agent, whether it be sod or turf.
Right. So if the board votes to use turf instead of grass, that turf would serve as that protective barrier between the impacts left in place and the students.
Right, but what you mentioned before with respect to sod, the protective barrier is that it's not just putting grass on top of the dirt that's there after you remove it, it's actually putting layers of stone and other you had described multiple layers before the grass actually got put on top. Is that not right?
So I think the description of the different layers of materials that go beneath the final restoration would be for turf, like the shock pad, the geotextile fabric, the drainage stone. That's specific for the artificial turf. For grass, you need 4 feet of clean. That 4 foot of clean can be, or 2 feet of clean, or 4 feet, depending on what the state approves. But if we use the high school as a guidance here, we're hopeful that 2 foot would be enough. And that 2 feet needs to be some sort of clean material. It can be stone, it can be all clean fill that's been sampled and certified clean. And then the actual surface is whatever, 3 inches of sod or topsoil that's either planted or sod. But the decision, why the decision matters is because when we're remedial planning, what we're putting into the remedial action work plan that eventually gets issued to both the EPA and the state, the final cover affects the depth of the excavation. So if you're having an artificial turf cover for the fields, we're going to propose a 1 foot excavation. However, if natural grass is going to be the ultimate selected final restoration, we're going to be proposing a 2 foot excavation.
Okay.
It has to be specific.
All right. Christina Downey.
Just a couple quick questions. So I'm a weird echo in my house. When we talk about sod and grass, it's kind of hydroseeding versus sod, right? It still has to have a rested period where it grows and takes, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Right, like so at New Lebanon, where we just put it down in the fall, it's had to sit for the whole season until it just opened, or it would have opened in April if school had been open, correct? Are you familiar with that?
Not with the exact seeding of New Lebanon, but
Yeah, so it was the same, that was the concept. But just a question about process. Again, it's my word of the night. If we go, whatever option we go with, let's just say turf, and we get before the state agencies and they say, like, what's the option if they say, no, you can't do your plan? How does what happens next? Let's just say they decide they're not going to let us do what we want, that we want to do the same thing as we're doing as field 6 and 7. How does it all play out?
So I don't think their direction will be, no, you can't do that, meaning not you can't install turf field. They may say you may need to excavate more than a foot, or you may need to excavate in certain hotspots. We may need to chase some of the more impacted materials at depth. We're not entirely sure about that. We have talked about that previously. That was before the high school got the approval for the 1 foot excavation and artificial turf restoration.
Okay. So it's basically, we're just using like that proposal as our guidance, but they could say no, but they could say, yeah. We're hopeful they would say yes to the same plan, but there's no guarantee.
That's right.
So, thank you.
All right, Mr. Scher.
I hadn't thought about, or I shouldn't say I hadn't thought about it. I hadn't thought about it completely until Karen brought it up, but, and thank you, Karen. I'm a little lost in this conversation too. And part of the reason I'm lost in this conversation is the motion that was made. I thought we were talking about selecting a remediation option, but the motion is about grass versus turf. So I think we need to kind of clean this up, but I'll come back to that because I feel like I'm having this conversation. Someone's talking to me about the color of the curtains in the room when I really have to get the asbestos off the wall and the floors. So I thought I was having a conversation about asbestos, and then we could talk about the color of the curtains. But so it feels a little weird to me. I guess I'm going to stick my neck out. Ryan, I'm a little worried about some of the things you said, and I've tried to keep it straight in all of the meetings. You know, like in one breath, we said we're like Greenwich High School. And in the last meeting, we said, well, this one's different than Greenwich High School. So I'm a little worried that, you know, a layman like me is making connections that aren't in fact there, which clouds my decision-making. So I'm going to operate on the assumption, a couple assumptions, and say, if you vary, the more you vary from existing regulations, the more complicated the approval is and the longer it takes. Okay, that's the first assumption I'm going to make. Makes perfect sense. If I go to the planning department to building a house and I comply with everything and I meet their FAR and I meet their setbacks, I immediately get an approval. If I need to get a zoning variance because I want the house closer to my neighbor, or by the way, I want to elevate it and put in fill, or I want a bigger house, I got to go to Zoning Board of Appeals, and that takes a while. So I think we haven't talked about the amount of time this is actually going to take. And I'm fearful, because I see all these notes from parents seem to be thinking, oh, it says turf 35 days, great, we're getting fields in September. And that's probably a really bad assumption. So I want to talk about the remediation. I want to select a remediation option because I only want to do this remediation once. I don't want to have a future board when I may not even live in town have to deal with this again. I want to take away at least 2 feet of toxic dirt. I'd prefer 3. Okay? The second thing I want is I'm not interested in the trade-off, because Ryan, you explained this last time, that there is a decimal point difference in cancer incidence between 10 parts per million and 50 parts per million. So our town is wealthy enough that we can afford to do a 10 parts per million remediation. We should be going to the safer student standard. Regarding grass versus turf, I'm largely indifferent. One costs $500,000, one costs $2.2 million. I'm much more interested in having a conversation about how we're going to get rid of the toxic material than engaging in the fight between people from, I don't know, OGRCC, football, this, that, and the next thing that want turf, and other people who are environmentalists who only want grass. I kind of want to park that conversation. I want to get through the regulatory of getting the toxic material out of there. The other thing I want to do, which is why I want a minimum of 2 feet, based upon what you've said, Ryan, is if in the future we find out that this turf is in fact toxic and bad for health of children, which has been asserted by a whole bunch of people to the board before, I don't want to live in a situation where I've only cut away 1 foot and I have to go back and do the remediation the second time to take out more material. I don't want to do that. I want to do this once. I want to make it as clean as is reasonably possible. And I'm unwilling to pick the cheapest option just to get this thing through. There have been many, many people who have talked about other sections of town cheaping out on the western side of town. There's some people involved in schools who've been very active about that. I would hate to see some of those same people in a rush be willing to take the cheap option, which is what is kind of on the table, at 1 foot with a cap. I want to spend what it spends to fix this for this neighborhood at a reasonable level of safety. And that means for me, a minimum of taking out 2 feet and going to 10 parts per million. I'll let the other board members duke it out over grass versus turf. The last thing I want to see in the plan is I want to see if we have to take more than 2 feet in order to achieve this objective. I would like the board to vote on this option discreetly, which is putting in all of the conduit for lights and communications in the event in the future we want to put that in. So if that can't be done in 2 feet, I want to go more, because I think we do need, we long have needed additional athletic capacity, particularly to support middle school programs, but also to support high school practice fields. So it's a long-winded way of just kind of getting it all out on the table, but that's where I'm living as a board member. I want to deal with the remediation questions first. I want to deal with grass and turf later, or as a separate number 2 item. And I want to be sure we're thinking about putting in what needs to be so we only do this once and do not leave a problem, potential problem, for a future board.
All right, Ms. Hirsch.
I'm just kind of surprised. I know that we have discussed this remediation plan. It's come before the board. I think this is the 3rd or 4th time we have actually discussed this now. You know, I know that this is not about going, at least for me, for what is the cheapest. It is, these students have been without a field for at least 5 years. It is about making sure that we give them something so that they have the same athletic experience and the same other kinds of experiences that their peers are having at Central and Eastern. And I know that, you know, we are in a very different area of town, so they're not neighbors directly on top of that field. You know, there are areas that are natural grass there, so no matter what we are doing, there are areas that don't need remediation, so there will be some sort of hybrid plan. But, you know, that community has been crying out for the longest time to get this moved forward. And we are right at that cusp. We are at this point where we can say we need to go forward and let the experts who are deep in EPA really just, make these decisions, because none of these decisions would be put forward for us if they weren't healthy options. I think that, we would be doing an exceptional disservice to that school, to those students in that community, by continuously bringing this back to debate and debate and debate. I think it's time for us to sort of make a decision so that we can at least hear from the state what we can do going forward. There is time for us to hear more from the community, but I think that we've been hearing from the community loud and clear for the longest time. They want this field to move forward. It's been far too long. And I think that, we can go back and forth and debate some of these things all day. There's a lot of, things that we are not experts in, but, I want to thank Ryan for all of the incredible work that he has done. He is an expert. He knows how this process and this planning goes. And, I have my faith that the EPA and the DEEP will not allow us to do something that would be unhealthy or unsafe for our students. I really, I'm feeling a lot of frustration that this has come to us so many times, and we've asked so many of these questions over and over again, and we're still at this point. But I'd really like to sort of make a decision so that we can move forward and get this going for the students. They've waited far too long.
Mr. Kelly.
Well, I was going to call the question, but I see Ms. Stowe has her hand up. Ms. Stowe, do you want to keep your hand up, or would you like to put it down? Do you want to say something?
Kathleen?
Sorry, can I say one thing? Is that okay?
Absolutely.
If it's all right, then we'll come back to you for your.
It's
Good.
absolutely fine, yes.
Okay, real fast. I mean, I just wanted to echo what Karen said. We had the appropriate authorities provide us with safe options, and we just spent an hour looking at how to save $100,000. And we are looking at an option that does have $2 million of savings. And most importantly, Gordon surveyed his community, and very rarely do we see something that 80% agrees with, and 80% wanted turf. So I'll let Joe call the question, but I just wanted to get those three things out on the table.
One quick question before I call the question. Ryan.
Yes, Mr.
Are there degrees of safety here? Is it absolute that whatever gets approved will be absolutely safety, or are there sort of safety, kind of safety, more safe than the last one, or a little more safe than the one before that? Or is it absolutely safety, whatever gets approved and done?
Yeah, so we stay away from the word safe. All the strategies that we're proposing and that get issued to the state and federal entities for approval are protective. So we propose protective strategies, and the EPA and DEP dictate if that strategy is protective for implementation.
Thank you. I'd like to call the question.
Ryan, can you say that again? What you said about safe? We can't call these plans safe? Is that what you said?
No, I'm saying that we talk about human health risk, and we talk about being protective. My initial statement was like the word safe won't appear in any regulatory decision or any remedial action work plan. It's about, designing a system that's going to protect, that's ultimately going to be protective for the human health and the environment.
All right, so Mr. Kelly's called the question. Unless there's any objection to that, what we will do, I see Mr. Scher's hand up. So Mr. Kelly, did you want to make a motion to close the debate? Was that your intention?
Yes, I'd like to make a motion to close the debate.
All right, is there a second for that motion?
Aye, Kathleen Stowe.
All right, Kathleen Stowe seconds it. So that motion is not debatable. So the motion is to close debate on the item. I'm going to take a roll call vote on that. Bernstein, yes. Stowe?
Yes.
Hirsch?
Yes.
Downey?
I had my hand up to ask a question. That's why.
All right, not debatable.
No, it was just what, in terms of calling the question, is we're voting on simply the grass versus turf. I just want to understand. That's what, when he calls the question and we're
Sorry.
posing debate.
That is the motion on the table, but that is the motion before us, but this motion right now is about closing the debate on the item. So it's a yes or no, or abstain.
No.
Okay. Mr. Kelly.
Yes.
All right. Ms. Kowalski.
No.
Ms. Olson.
Yes.
All right. And Mr. Scher.
I guess I have to vote no if I want to ask another clarifying question. Is that right?
That is correct, because this needs
Okay,
two-thirds.
then I'm voting no, because I have another question for Ryan.
Okay. So first, Ms. Downey had her hand up to ask a question. We'll go to Ms. Downey, and then Mr. Scher will get you, and anybody else that wants to raise their hand.
No, I think I understand what we're doing, but I just want to be sure I'm clear. So when we vote on the motion, we're simply voting on the surface that's going to go on the top. Is that correct, Ryan? Or are we voting on how far down we're digging, to Peter's question? I want to understand clearly what we're voting on. And I'm a little, I thought I knew, and it's gotten a little convoluted.
You're voting on surface. That's it.
We're voting on surface. That's it. And then the rest of the steps, how far down we go, et cetera, is part of the implementation once we get the approval.
No.
I believe Ryan might be able to best answer that, but
Yeah,
it is
Ryan.
part of the
Yeah,
discussion.
just for clarity. So yeah, we will provide options for the board to select. I mean, I would say that if you're voting right now to have turf as your surface, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be a 1 foot, 2 foot, 3 foot excavation.
Okay.
That can be a decision that you guys make separately.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Scher, and then we'll.
Well, that's my process question, Ryan. My process question is, Ryan, how does this work? How do you go to them with, how do you go to the state and the EPA with a plan proposal that you want approved if you don't know whether we want 1, 2, 3, 10 parts per million, 50 parts per million? How do you do that? I don't understand how that works. That's the part that's confusing me.
So Peter, that is one part of the question that we'd be getting answered, is what the top surface is. If there's still not agreement on how much soil you want to remove before you install the turf, yes, that is also an answer that we would need. We're not making those decisions.
Do you need to know that to proceed? I don't understand. How do you proceed, go talking to the EPA if we haven't made any of those decisions? I'm lost, because don't you have to go to them with a plan?
Hear me?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
I think I'm getting.
I can hear you now.
Jamie
Ryan,
Barr, can you hear me, Jamie?
I can. Can you hear me?
All right, sorry guys. So Jamie Barr he runs. Oh, my connection's all messed up.
Hi everyone. This is Jamie Barr. I'll just kind of take over here from Ryan. So I run the Northeast Division for Langen's Environmental Group. I'm a licensed environmental professional here in Connecticut, and Ryan and I work very closely together on this project. Peter, to get to your question about the two parts, right? There's overall two parts to the remedy itself. The remedy is the excavation component of the dirty dirt, and then a protective cover, whether that protective cover is soil and grass or it's turf. I think what's being asked tonight is the field going to be turfed? If it is, we will design the turf into whatever remedy we end up coming up with. and we've presented so many options. I mean, I want to say close to a dozen. We've gone through at least 12, and we've narrowed those down based on a whole bunch of different factors. Will we be taking here tonight and going, okay, turf, we're going to go right to the state and present one option? No, there will be a follow-up discussion. It would be turf or grass, sod, and soil as the cap. From the next step of that is, how much do you want to remove? So the remedy is two parts. It's removal of materials, and it's what is gonna cap.
It'll be on top.
The site. Correct.
Yeah, I got that part. So when I'm on the second part, which is how much do we excavate and to what level of how much we cart away, Ryan has done a great job explaining to us in his 2 presentations to us that he provided 6 options. And he said, look, you know, you got to figure out how much of this you're carting away. You got to figure out what level you're going to leave, what acceptable level is left over. The options that were presented by your firm, one was at 10 parts per million, one's at 50. And then he said, oh, by the way, you got to figure out what you want the cap to be. And he has done a great job, by the way, of explaining they're kind of related. You got to make all decisions and they all work together. So the part I guess I was asking is, when do we have to make the, what you call the dirty dirt decision, and how does that work? Because I got the part on the cap. I can tell you how the cap's going to go. There's going to be enough votes on this board tonight to go in and put in artificial turf. So that part will get answered in about, I don't know, 10 minutes when the vote's taken.
Correct. So
I'm back on the other part, which is when do we, as the client, have to tell you what we want for dealing with the dirty dirt?
I would say before we go in and have the discussion with the state about the finalized remedy. Because what we need to do is get consensus from the state that first, now we have a cap option. Okay, now we never had that before because it was in question.
Correct.
What was that going to be? I noticed it's coming up my name under as Ryan Wolstrom. Hi everyone. I joined through his link. So so getting their consensus will be around, okay, this is what we're proposing. We already now know that 1 foot and the turf is an acceptable option. There were no options ever formally approved in the state until the high school. So you had mentioned before, it was previously 4 feet or 2 feet and some kind of cap cover as part of, that currently sits in the regulations. But there is a component of the regulations that allows you to evaluate the specific site setting for what would be protective, using the tools that EPA and DEP provide to us as professionals to make those run calculations and say, okay, well, this meets your EPA standard or your DEP standard, therefore this 1 foot or 2 foot, whatever it ends up being, is considered protective in their eyes. They ultimately approve that though. So if right now 1 foot from the high school has been approved in a similar scenario. So they've run those calculations and they said that, okay, 1 foot would work. Now we've been working with the folks at the high school along, this process since we joined the whole team and working on this. So we've been following along the way. I think now that we have that approval in hand, that option becomes something that's truly viable. DEP and EPA are not going to approve something that's not protective. And me as an LEP,
okay. I think I got my answer. The answer is you guys made a proposal of a cap, 1 foot cut, 50 parts per million, And that's effectively what the board is voting on right now. Even though the motion is only on the cap, you guys are now going to take that and go from here, this 1 foot cut, 50 parts per million, and see if you can get it approved. I don't need to debate it anymore. And, based on that, I'm going to wind up voting no, but that's okay. Others may want to go forward with that level of remediation. I'm not comfortable with that. If we were having a conversation that said turf on the top, at least 2 feet, 2 at 10%, and the board were voting on that, I could gladly get behind it, but that's not where we are. I understand thank you for answering the question.
All right, Ms. Kowalski.
Yeah, so that set of that dialogue back and forth really answered a lot of my questions, and and knowing that what's really on the table is really this one foot and the capping of turf, in my mind, for all the questions I've asked before, and I don't believe that's necessarily faster, and it certainly, I don't have the confidence that it's actually safer, and nothing that's been said tonight, although it's been a very helpful dialogue, suggests that it would be otherwise, that it would be the fastest route. I think the fastest route is certainly something more of 4 feet or 2 feet, and that's doesn't appear to be on the table with the whole concept of turf. So the vote, I'm not, if this were an issue of, as Peter said, we're going to go turf and we're going to remove 4 feet, then I would say, yeah, that sounds like that's the fastest move, but that's not what I'm hearing here. And that's not what the suggestion is for the proposal going forward. So I'm a no.
Okay, with that, we're going to move forward with calling the question. The motion on the table is to approve artificial turf as the approach for the remediation action plan at Western Middle School. We'll do a roll call. Bernstein, yes. Stowe?
Yes.
Hirsch?
Yes.
Downey?
Yes.
Kelly?
Yes.
Kowalski?
No.
Olson?
Yes.
And Scher?
No.
That motion passes 6-2. Thank you very much, folks from Langen. Appreciate your efforts, and I'm sure we'll be hearing from you again. With that, we're going to move on to our next action item, which is the district voluntary retirement incentive. I'm going to go ahead and make the motion, and then if one of the members of the negotiations committee wanted to second that, I move that we approve the district retirement incentive program as recommended by the BOE negotiations committee and direct the superintendent to share the details of such with the members of the GEA. Is there a second?
I will second it. If Christina doesn't want to do that, I will do it.
Thank you. All right, just to structure the discussion on this, we've invited Tom Mooney, who's the attorney for the board on these matters, to join us tonight. We also have Sean O'Keefe and Tony Jones and Shemaine Johnson, who assisted the negotiations committee. There's a couple parts to this. One is the actual structure of the agreement, the mechanics of it. Tom can speak to that. There's an economics issue. Obviously, Sean will speak to that. Tony and Shemaine will talk about the human resources aspect of this. There's one other item that members received an email from Dan Ozemir, who's the chair of the Labor Contracts Committee for the RTM. The negotiations committee met with the members of the RTM Labor Contracts Committee yesterday in executive session, shared the details of this. Mr. Mooney can talk to this a bit, but basically what the Labor Contracts Committee has asked me to share with the board, which you all have seen by email, is that it is their view that we should share this with the RTM such that they can take it up as an action item, I guess, if they so choose. Mr. Mooney has a different opinion on that, and he can talk to that a bit, and we can have a discussion around that. So maybe we can talk about the mechanics first, move on to the finances and HR aspect, and then we'll we'll talk about the RTM Labor Contracts Committee, at least the request from Dan. So Tom, why don't you take it away?
Well, good evening, everybody. I would like to start by just describing the plan and give an overview. Every so often, boards of education offer early retirement incentives to their teachers. The premise of a retirement incentive is that by encouraging teachers who are eligible to take a retirement, there may be a cost reduction because the teachers who leave are at the top of the salary schedule, and we thank them for their loyal service, and we hire teachers who are not at the top of the salary schedule. And that differential generates cost savings to the Board of Education. The question in any plan like this is whether by providing an incentive, the district encourages more teachers to retire than would otherwise be the case, because in the normal course, teachers retire from every year. Some teachers will retire and they will be replaced. So in devising an early retirement incentive plan, it's important to establish a target and then move forward with the plan if the target is met. And the target is based on some assumptions as to what the normal retirement number would be and what additional number of retirees who were thus incentivized will pay not only for the benefits to be provided to those who've already retired, but to the people who are incentivized, leaving then a cost savings, a reduction in salary for the Board of Education. This particular plan is based on payment to the participating teachers of $15,000 in the first year and $15,000 in the second year, with such amounts to be paid to either an annuity or a medical trust so that taxes would be avoided on the payment and provide a greater benefit to the participating teachers. In recognition of the fact that some people had already retired, the board and the Greenwich Education Association discussed a compromise whereby teachers who had already indicated that they would retire would not participate to the same extent as other teachers, but rather would only receive half the benefit payable in the second year. The reason for that compromise is that the Board of Education would not want to create a circumstance to discourage teachers from providing timely notice of retirement. And if we came up with a plan which said, essentially, too bad for you, you already told us, so you don't get any benefit, that would become part of legend. And then in future years, teachers would possibly hold off on giving us notice of retirement, and that would make planning more difficult. So through discussions between the board committee and the Greenwich Education Association, this plan was devised, and we understand that there are no labor relations implications should the board approve this plan and go forward. I would like to say that any plan like this is based on projections and uncertainty. Although if we didn't think there was merit to the plan, we wouldn't spend the time working it out. But given that this is based on projections and we don't know who will retire and what impact that will have on the school district until we make the offer, the plan further reserves to the Board of Education the right not to go forward with the plan as it deems in the best interest of the Greenwich Public Schools. So the timing of the plan, it's imperative that the board decide one way or the other tonight, because the timing of the plan is that teachers who wish to participate have to submit their resignations for retirement purposes by June 1st, and the Board of Education will have until June 15th to analyze the results and decide whether to go forward with the plan. Again, if we didn't believe that it would make sense, we wouldn't spend the time. So we're optimistic that the plan will be successful, that it will go forward. But given the uncertainty, the board has reserved that judgment. So that's a brief overview of the mechanics of the plan. It's fairly straightforward. It's strictly voluntary. And we hope that it will be an incentive such that teachers will take advantage of this new unexpected benefit, submit their retirement, and the board will thereby be able to reduce its salary costs. I have shared with the board committee my view that this is a matter within the discretion of the Board of Education. And I can explain that further, and I defer to Mr. Bernstein in terms of getting into that. But I just wanted to say that I do believe that the board has the legal authority to enter into this agreement. Boards of education have significant independent powers under Connecticut law. And this, in my mind, is simply the exercise of that power. I'll pause there for questions, and I'm happy to elaborate if that would be helpful.
Thank you, Tom. I think let's table the discussion on authority, and let's stick with the mechanics of the agreement. So I see Ms. Kowalski's got her hand up.
Yeah, so I actually had questions on the mechanics, but I can jump into, on the authority, but I can.
If you're asking about the mechanics.
Yeah, but I can jump to the mechanics questions. So are we, my understanding of this is that it would be entirely self-funded. Is that self-funded in the sense of where are those monies coming from? And is it self-funded every year going forward, or would we have to ask for monies from the BET at outer years depending upon expenses? Like, how does this modeling look over periods of time?
Well, after I describe the mechanics and answer your questions, we'll defer to Mr. O'Keefe, who has modeled the economic impact. But the premise simply is that it's only a 2-year plan. It will only go forward if the board believes that the replacement salaries of the teachers who were incentivized to retire are lower than the teachers would otherwise be earning. And just for simple example, you have a budget for next year. I know you have your challenges, but that budget presupposes certain people to be continued in employment. So those funds have been, I guess, will be shortly appropriated. And so the salary differences will be the funds with which the board pays for the incentive in the first and in the second year. So there is no premise here that this will be out-of-pocket cost to the Board of Education that would require an additional appropriation. Much the opposite. It's intended that the board would reduce the costs it might otherwise project, and with that cost reduction, pay for the incentive.
Okay. So I apologize. So here's more of a mechanics question. Do we have, what is our time frame? So a teacher has to give notice by June 1st of their intent to retire under this program. What if how long do we as a board get to consider whether or not that particular teacher meets the requirements we need in order to affect the savings which we are attempting to achieve?
That analysis is not done by individual teacher. The analysis is done by the teachers as a whole who have submitted their resignations. And I do want to clarify that under the plan, teachers would retire, would submit the resignation for retirement purposes irrevocably, except that if the plan doesn't go forward, they have every right to rescind their resignations and continue employment. So this doesn't prejudice any teacher if he or she chooses to participate in the plan and it doesn't go forward. The board has 2 weeks until June 15th to make the financial analysis and the HR analysis in terms of replacing teachers who retire and deciding whether moving forward with the plan is in the best interest of the Greenwich Public Schools.
Oh, okay. So I see. So let's say 20 teachers decide to retire under this program. We would not be looking at them individually, but collectively as the 20 as to whether or not we would benefit from any savings. And so we wouldn't cancel it. If we decide to go forward, we go forward with those teachers within the pool. If we decide not to go forward with the program, we're not picking and choosing which teachers we're going to accept for retirement. It's either an all or a nothing.
Almost. That is the way the plan is structured. And we did have discussion, just balancing the interests of the individual teacher, the interest of the association as an entity, and the interest of the Board of Education. And we did agree that the board would not have the right to go to individual teachers and say, not so fast, not you, based on any facts or circumstances. It is an all or nothing plan as it's structured. However, the plan further contemplates that should the board identify a problem with regard to eligibility and the impact on the school district, that the board believes can be resolved through further discussion with the association. The plan contemplates that the parties can agree to amend the eligibility provisions during that interim period between June 1st and June 15th. So it's almost an either a yes, no, all or nothing, but we do have that opportunity at least to discuss possible amendment should that be determined to be in the interest of the school district.
Okay, thank you.
All right, if there aren't other questions on the mechanics, we'll turn to the financial piece. So Mr. O'Keefe, if you want to address that.
Certainly. So if you go to the last page in this section of the package, the whole premise of this is the savings that are generated is a net savings, and starts with the savings, I'll call it the gross savings, associated with the removal of not the removal, but the retiree salary coming out and being replaced by a lower cost replacement. And from that difference, then an incentive is paid, resulting in a net savings. And that's basically the premise of how this works. In this particular chart, there's a number of assumptions here. One is that we're requesting a minimum participation of 30 retirees. The chart also assumes that we would backfill all 30 of the retirees. That's just an assumption in this chart. The other assumptions in terms of the average salary amount of the retiree is based on master's level, step 14, and a assumption of a replacement cost of a master's level, step 5. So you can see the numbers in the 2021 row that with an average salary of a retiree at MA 14 of $112,583 and a replacement cost of an MA 5 at $74,996 would generate a grand total of $1,127,000 of gross savings. And from that, incentive payments in that year of about $418,000 would net you savings ideally of $709,000 for the 2021 school year. And then you'll see that in the out years that the cost escalates, so it's a continued savings over time. What I do want to mention, if we could go to the bottom, there are other savings opportunities and other considerations to be made. One is if there is a higher participation level, that could increase the overall savings. If a retiree is not replaced or the position is absorbed internally, the work is absorbed internally, the amount of savings would be significantly higher than the average in that it would yield retiree savings, less incentive would be, so in other words, if you take retiree savings of 112 and pay out of 15, you'd yield about $99,000 of savings, which would be significantly higher. On the other side, if retirees in a shortage area such as special ed, world language, chemistry, for example, there's a possibility that the replacement or backfill cost could be higher in a shortage area, so that could have a negative impact on the overall savings. One thing you'll notice that at the top, we've got a row for 2019-20, and it says no impact. There is a possibility, and it's currently written in the draft proposal that at the discretion of the Board of Ed. And to the extent that the Board of Ed ends the 2019-20 school year with a surplus, that we could opt with approval from the Board of Ed and the BET to prepay some of these incentives. So for every dollar that you prepay out of any surplus in 2019-20, you would increase your overall savings benefit for 2021. The last item is health benefits. So to the extent that a retiree with family health coverage, so a retiree with family health coverage retires and is replaced with an MA5, someone who's fresh out of grad school, single, no children, no spouse, you could generate some significant savings. In that one example, it would generate an additional $16,000 of savings of health cost to the town. Again, it's to the town, so that would be a benefit to the town's health plan. So family to a one-person coverage, about 16. Family to a two-person coverage would be about 5,000 or 6,000. So that would be, it's not baked into these numbers, but it would be an additional benefit. Any questions?
All right, any questions on the finances? Mr. Scher.
Sean, could you put that chart back up for a second? Or whoever was putting it up. Sean, I just wanted to confirm some things. When you presented this to us the other night, you said a couple things. I just want to reconfirm them. One is, did this account for that the person is coming in at an MA5, but the next year they go up a step and the next year they go up a step?
Yes.
Okay, great.
You can see the 74,996 going up to 78,776. Those numbers were taken directly from the GEA agreement.
Right. The second thing I think you told us the other night is this is all self-funding, meaning we don't have to go and ask anybody for any money. Does that include, do we have to ask somebody for approval to carry over money from one year to this year to next year? Or I think you told me the other night there is no money to carry over.
Well, as you'll see when I go through the financials, we are currently forecasting at budget, but I do believe we will have a surplus to some extent, and that is highly dependent on the final outcome of the negotiations with STA. But I do believe, based on the transportation and the substitute savings, utility savings, supply savings, I believe that we will not only cover the exposure that I called out back in December, but we will also have a small surplus, and I don't know how small yet or large. And to the extent that we do, we could certainly prepay some of these incentives.
Do we need that if someone allows us to do that, right?
If the board and the BET allows us to do it, then we could help ourselves to a higher savings
next year
in a budget year that we all know is going to be a challenge.
Okay. The last question I had was, I got a little confused. I know that when we got this presented to us as to the last board session, there were no documents. And now we have the documents. So the thing that confused me a little bit is in the documents, it talks about forget the exact term. It's talking about a healthcare like trust. It sounds like, maybe I've misunderstood how that works. It sounds like instead of giving this money as a cash, is it right? Giving this money as a cash payment to an individual
it is not
employee, it's used.
These would not be a cash outlay. These would be a payment to a deferred retirement plan or medical trust of the participant's choice.
So the medical trust is restricted. It's like it's an HRA.
Like a flex spending account.
Yeah, right.
The tax deferred medical, you can pay for premiums, you can pay for anything medical related.
But it's their money once we give it to them.
Absolutely.
So it's gone. Okay. I also, you know, working in the healthcare space on that, I'm not so sure this is a good assumption at all, because the people retiring have moved past the part where their children have aged out. So I think we're trading essentially employee only or employee plus one. Maybe it's a flat trade on the healthcare to a younger person at MA5 that may not be married or have a domestic partner. Sounds like that's a trade. I don't think we should focus on the savings, because the far and away, you pointed out, the most expensive employees are not older employees in healthcare. They're mid-career employees with families. Those far and away are the ones that cost the most in a healthcare plan.
Yeah,
So
at this point,
I
it's
think we
all
should plan
assumptions,
on
Peter.
those savings. If we get them, if the town gets them, great.
Yeah. I totally agree with you. It's not something until we get the names and until we know who the backfills are, we don't know what the true savings is.
But this, we could pretty much take, this is under our full control. I think this is it's a good program. It's a good program. I mean, people can argue about how much money we're leaving on the table and what should the union have gotten and what have you. And those are legitimate questions. But the fact that you guys have come up with a program that helps us strategically with our HR strategy, it's self-funding, and it creates savings that we get to keep. This is a good proposal. I'm going to vote yes.
I mean, I heard you before, major on the major. I couldn't agree more. This is a major.
Good job.
All right, if there aren't any other questions about the finances aspect, Tony and Shemaine, maybe you want to talk to the HR aspect that we were just. Oh wait, hang on, Ms. Olson, do you have a question on finances?
No, it was a more general question. Tony can go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna let Shemaine go ahead and speak to the permanent subs. Shemaine, if you want to share.
Sure. I was just going to also add to the discussion that we have 15 teachers that have already declared that they are going to be retiring. There are a few others that have reached out this week just to get a few questions answered, that are really looking to see what the outcome of today's decision is to make that more permanent, which is positive given that 30 is our goal. One of the questions that have come up is our plan to backfill. There's been a lot of discussions about possible changes, and the importance to look at positions, to look at our internal folks that would be able to fill some of these vacancies first, before posting them externally. Another thing that our department has done is pulled a list of long-term subs that have been committed to working in the district and certified within the last 2 years. We have 29 individuals. Most of the individuals on this list have been emailing us regularly, looking for something more permanent, that already hold the certifications of the individuals that have expressed that they will be retiring. So that's also reassuring, because it helps us solve the problem. And previously, there was also a question about how do these numbers compare to the retirees that have, the individuals that have retired in previous years. Last year, we had 15 teachers retire. In the 17-18 school year, we had 16 teachers retire. In the 16-17 school year, we had 12 teachers retire. In 15-16, 21. And lastly, 14-15, 32 teachers retire. Just in comparison to last year, the numbers are consistent. And again, with the communication that GEA has shared with their members, individuals seem to be interested and have been reaching out to our department to express that, but not going to put anything finally in writing until the outcome of the meeting. I don't know if there's anything to add to that.
Tony, did you want to add anything?
No, I think we're confident that we will be able to replace positions. And if there are some high need areas, we will advertise early and try to get the hiring done. So we still have people in the district, as Jermaine referenced, that are in those substitute type positions that would love to have a permanent job in the district.
All right, Ms. Olson.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mooney, for explaining this to us beforehand and again this evening. Because this is entirely voluntary, I can get behind it. I'm okay with this. I just have to say that some ways educators have been previously spoken about this evening makes it sound like we're not actually talking about human beings, and not in this particular instance, but I need to say that these are human beings we're talking about with lives and families, and that have given their careers to education, to the Greenwich Public School System, and they are at the heart of our education. Some comments that were said earlier after Tony's opening remarks were unacceptable, and I just want to remind everybody that we're talking about humans who are about to step back, many of who are about to step back into a post-COVID school building, and this they deserve our utmost respect.
Thank you. All right, if there aren't any more discussions on the basic mechanics, the savings, or the HR aspect, why don't we turn to the RTM Labor Contract Committee Chair's question. And Mr. Mooney, if you want to frame it before we jump into it, I know you've had some discussions as well with the town council, assistant council.
Yes. Whenever you have two lawyers in the room, you have the opportunity for a disagreement. And this is a respectful disagreement between my interpretation of the legal rights of the Board of Education and the town attorneys. And we will continue that discussion. But the position here simply is that boards of education have independent authority in many ways. And Connecticut General Statute Section 10-222 expressly states that the appropriation made to the Board of Education may be expended by and in the discretion of the Board of Education. Unlike other town bodies, the board acts independently in implementing the educational interests of the state, and the statutes respect in many ways that independent authority. I've been involved in working with school districts for over 40 years. I've been involved in a number of early retirement incentive programs. This is the first time a municipality has asserted some oversight in this when there's no request for an appropriation. And so I base my recommendation to the board that this is within your jurisdiction on the statutes that control collective bargaining. There are circumstances where the town has a specific statutory role to play. In our recently concluded negotiations, we were respectful of that role, and members of the board of the BET participated in the negotiations, as was their right under the statute. When the negotiations were concluded, the Board of Education dutifully submitted the collective bargaining agreement to the town, and the RTM considered the matter as is its responsibility under the Teacher Negotiation Act. In this particular case, this is a matter involving working conditions. And as some may know, when you're in a collective bargaining environment, an employer cannot unilaterally change working conditions. But given that this is a voluntary plan, it is one of those rare opportunities for a win-win. The consultation with the association has led to its concurrence. And so the board has the legal right in the collective bargaining sense to make this offer to the employees, even though it's a change in working conditions. But the further assertion that this should now be submitted to the RTM is a premise with which I simply disagree. In fact, I'm not quite sure what would be submitted to the RTM and what the proposed action would be. The path is well lit with regard to collective bargaining agreements. There is no similar statutory authority anytime a employing Board of Education reaches an agreement with a union to change working conditions, that somehow goes to the town. There's really no ready avenue for that. So that's the recommendation I've made to the Board of Education.
Discussion on that?
Yes.
All right, Mr. Scher.
I understand Tom has his opinion. I understand the town has their opinion. I'm not interested in, and I'm not qualified to debate that. But, and I've worked alongside Tom. I worked alongside him on these labor contracts for 6 straight years. So this won't be my first rodeo on this kind of situation. The thing that I guess I wanted to know is the GEA needs assurance quickly that this thing is done and dusted. So what is the plan to resolve this open legal question with the town of Greenwich? Because the GEA is now in a position, I guess, where they have to sit there and go, the Board of Ed says it's a signed and sealed deal after we vote on it, presuming it passes. But they've also got to sit there and say, well, now they're faced with sorting out between our 2 legal opinions, or these 2 legal opinions. That isn't a secure position for the GEA. I'm concerned about what that will do with the uptake. Maybe I shouldn't be concerned. I just went online with the data that Tony sent us, and it looks like there's 45% of all of our teachers in the system are qualified for this. So 45% of the teachers in the system are paid our highest price, our highest rate. So they're at the top and they're over 20 years. So maybe I don't have to worry about how many people might subscribe to it. But it seems to me we have to have, or maybe we don't, but somebody, the GA has to have assurance that this thing is a done and dusted deal. So what's the plan to get that resolved?
May I speak to that?
Ask the chairman.
Tom. Yeah, Tom, go ahead.
This disagreement in other contexts could be more of a problem. In this particular case, I don't see it as a problem because the very premise of this plan is that it's an opportunity, not a commitment. And the opportunity is offered to teachers, and the board has an opportunity to go forward, and the teachers have an opportunity to participate in a plan. If the RTM is entitled to its opinion, and if the RTM considers this matter and approves it, then this agreement is a moot point.
Yeah.
If the RTM, for whatever reason, would vote against it, then the Board of Education will have another fact to consider in deciding its action. But there is no certainty in this plan, so the discouraging aspect that could be otherwise feared is simply not there. It's an opportunity, and teachers who apply to participate in this plan do so knowing that it is not a sure thing, not because the RTM may or may not vote, but because the Board of Education has reserved the right to consider the impact of the plan and decide whether to go forward on the merits. The plan does make reference to the approval of the appropriate town bodies. But the bottom line here is that if the board approves this plan tonight, you're deciding to make an opportunity available, and the teachers understand it is not a commitment, and we'll just see how it goes.
Tom, I'm sorry, I didn't ask my question properly. Thank you for your answer, though. My question is, we're presumably all going to vote for this. The GEA is going to want to offer it to their rank and file. we want our employees to have the best comfort they can in making the decision that they're going to make individually, whether or not to apply for the program. I'm on the point of, this thing is running on an incredibly short time leash, right? June 1 is 9 days from now, something like that. Then we have another 2 weeks. The RTM is going to meet once. I don't think they plan to meet again. Somebody's got to go put it on their agenda if they think they're supposed to. I'm just wondering, is someone going to pick up the banner and try to resolve this with the RTM in the next, I don't know, 2-3 days? Just get it out of the way? That was really my question.
I see.
Who's going to do that? Do we need to do that? And is somebody going to do that?
Well, I have had a cordial conversation with the town attorney, and we have a scheduled call tomorrow to continue the discussion. I can't speak for whether those discussions will resolve the issue, but it certainly always helps to talk, and the discussions have been cordial and respectful, and so we'll just continue in communication. But the only way that this is going to be a problem is if the RTM decides that they do believe, or I should say they conclude and move forward with action on this matter, and they vote against it. But this is a very positive plan for everybody. And I would hope that irrespective of this legal disagreement, that the board approve this plan with optimism, that it will in fact be implemented and will result in a benefit to both the board and the teachers.
Tom, assume their position is correct. Is there a amount of time they have to consider it, and otherwise it defaults into effect?
Well, I'm not aware of a statutory basis for their position, so I'm not aware of any related timeline.
I'm sorry, let me ask a different question.
I do know that
when we submit a teacher's contract when we sign a teacher's contract under normal circumstances, not this situation.
That the statute is clear, there's a 30-day period within which the town may take action to reject, may take action to approve, or may not take action, and that's the same as an approval. There is no such timeline here, but I was just wanting to emphasize, if I may just finish, I just wanted to emphasize that the RTM is well aware of the timing, and to the extent there has been discussion about an RTM role, they're aware that any action would have to be taken promptly within the window that the plan provides.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, Peter, we're gonna move to Ms. Downey.
I just wanted to say thank you, Tom, for your fabulous guidance through this process. And Peter, I hear what you're saying, but I think having participated in the discussions, Tom's advice and his knowledge on this is probably unsurpassed. He wrote the statute possibly even. So his judgment that we don't need the RTM, I put a lot of faith in. However, that being said, we have kept them advised and we understand their interest, and we've talked to the BET about it. So even if we don't send them something, I know they independently take things up normally, and I think they would agree that this is a good thing. But I trust Tom's judgment in terms of what should, following the statute, what we need to do versus what people choose to do. But to his point that we still have the right to cancel this agreement, not that we would, but if we don't get the number of people, or if the people who choose to retire are all people we can't replace, we still have the opportunity to change gears on this. So we've preserved as much flexibility for the board as I think is possible, which is, so it makes a lot of sense on a lot of levels. And I think the process will move smoothly. I'm optimistic.
All right, Ms. Kowalski.
Thank you. Thanks, Tom. Your explanation was very helpful and provided some good clarity. My question goes to the point of this passes tonight, the RTM, and by the way, I am optimistic that all will run smoothly and everyone will come to the same agreement that I think all 8 of us are coming to. But what I'd like to understand is, if the RTM disagrees and wants to take it up, and let's say they reject this, then what? Like we say, our council says, and we all agree, I think, that we can independently do this. We don't need the RTM. The RTM says, no, we disagree with you and you do need us. And we're saying, no, we're kind of at an impasse. So what is the next step? Does someone go to, what's the next legal process and all of this to get this resolved given the short time frame? And if this were to come, I realize that this is a hypothetical that may not come to pass, but I think since there has been a whispering in the RTM that they're not totally on board with this or suggesting as such, what is the next step after this? We pass this, they don't like it, they take it up, they don't pass it, then what happens?
Well, you described your question appropriately as a hypothetical question. And if I thought there was some benefit in answering that hypothetical question in this forum, I would, but I don't. And I think that it's best to simply move forward and deal with issues as they come up. Just by way of example, let's just say that there was some question at the RTM. Well, that may not be just the end of it. That may be the beginning of a discussion to resolve that and move forward. So there are many different options, and I just am not, I don't believe it's helpful to speculate on what we would do when that hasn't happened.
Well, I didn't ask you to speculate. What I'm asking is, that is a hypothetical. Is it a legal course of action that one would have to take to push this forward? Or is it further discussion?
There's no avenue for resolving this. Should it remain a legal dispute, a matter of interpretation over how the statute should be interpreted, there's no way this would be resolved in a week, a month, 6 months. It's how lawyers are. If it's a disagreement, then we'd figure out what forum would resolve that disagreement, but it certainly wouldn't happen quickly. That's why I'm emphasizing focusing on the positive and moving forward and dealing with problems if and when they arise.
So I'll just add my 2 cents here. We've been looping in the other town authorities. We've let the BET know about this. We did let labor contracts know. We've met with them. Certainly had some good dialogue, and still obviously open to having that dialogue. I think Tom's advice is sound. I've looked at the statutes as well, but I trust his advice, and I'm glad he's still talking to the town lawyer. If the RTM chooses to take this up, I would say that's their prerogative, but not something that we stand in the way of at this point. There is that language in the contract that Tom mentioned. Basically, we have the right to revoke if the appropriate town bodies have not given their approval. And so that is something that we would have to take into account if we got to that point. But we're not there. I really don't believe that we are. We're looking at this, and while the genesis of this early retirement program is separate and apart from the budget discussions that we were having earlier, in that this was part of our contract with the teachers over the summer, that we would discuss this, that we would look into this as a program, and that really is the genesis. Many, many months before we ever got to COVID. In fact, the genesis is probably years and years old. It's come up in previous contract discussions. But the sheer fact is, the potential savings from this would be a great aid to us in the next year. And as we are trying to figure out ways to face that shortfall, I would imagine that a majority of the RTM will see that as the issue, and that these savings could be a lifeline for us in many, many ways. I do also want to take a moment to thank the negotiations committee. Joe and Christine, I've apologized to them already. When I appointed them, I told them this would be a sleepy get to know you year, but this obviously became very, very active, and they jumped into the fray. Tony, Sean, and Shemaine, you've been wonderful in terms of taking this on, running the numbers, working on that three-dimensional chessboard I mentioned earlier, and obviously, Tom, you're a rock for us. We absolutely appreciate that. Not seeing any other hands, I'm going to call the question. So the motion on the table is to approve the district retirement incentive program as recommended by the BOE Negotiations Committee and direct the superintendent to share it with the teachers. So I'm going to take a roll call vote. Bernstein is a yes. Stowe?
Yes.
Hirsch?
Yes.
Downey?
Yes.
Kelly?
Yes.
Kowalski?
Yes.
Olson?
Yes.
And Mr. Scher?
Yes.
All right, that passes unanimously. Thank you very much. I will provide notice of this to the Labor Contracts Committee and to the full BET, just so that wherever our action is, I believe some of those members are still on, because we have such a loyal following, and we'll continue discussions. But this hopefully will move forward. I think Mr. O'Keefe, who's had experience with these plans before, said you usually see a lot more activity in the last couple of days. So hopefully by June 1, we'll know what the number is, and we'll be in a better spot. With that, we'll turn to our next action item, which is the healthy food certification. So Tony, I'll turn it to you.
And I'll wish you all a good night. Thank you.
Night. This is an annual action item, and I'll ask Ann, Dr. Carabillo, if you have anything you want to say about it, but it's basically a formality.
No, I don't have anything to say about it. I'm good.
Dave?
It's basically a statement to the State Board of Education that the fact that we have what's called non-competitive foods, which is foods that are other than the state-funded meals for sale at the high school, the sales and the opportunity for sales of those foods outweigh the small amount of I think it's 10 cents a meal that we would benefit from by applying for it. And it would cause us to restructure a lot of the food that we sell, eliminate a lot of vending sales, candy sales at the Spiritware counter and so on. So back in 2014, when the law changed, I think that's when we pulled off the NSLP for the high school, and this is just a continuation of that.
Thank you. Dr. Carabillo.
So the reason that we are doing this, the high school really gives us the most benefit of being able to sell other foodstuffs that we would not be able to do if we were a member of the school lunch program. So it helps
Just
us
to confirm,
with our,
oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Sorry, Ann. Just to confirm, those are the a la carte items you're talking about?
Correct. And we would not be able to offer those if we were part of the school lunch program, the National School Lunch Program.
Thank you. Ms. Kowalski.
Sorry. I was wondering if we could call the question and vote.
I think that's a great idea. I don't see any other hands, so the motion, we have to make the motion. Sorry, I think we got ahead of ourselves. Ms. Kowalski, do you want to make the motion since you're anxious?
Sure. I would like, hold on, I'm just pulling it up. I would
You want me
like
to read it for you and then? Go ahead.
No, I'm totally fine. I think I'd like to make a motion to authorize the superintendent to take action not to implement the healthy food option as indicated in the health food certificate motion put forward by Dr. Carabello.
All right, is there a second for that motion?
I'll second it.
Mr. Kelly seconds, all right. So the motion's on the table. Bernstein, yes. Stowe?
Yes.
Hirsch?
Yes.
Downey?
Yes.
Kelly?
Yes.
Kowalski?
Yes.
Olson?
Yes.
Chair?
Yep.
Great, that passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Dave, thank you very much for joining us. Welcome to the board meetings. All right, next up is the financial and staffing report from Mr. O'Keefe. I'm going to just go ahead and make the motion to move this along. I move to authorize the financial and staffing report for the period ended April 30th, 2020 and March 31, 2020. Is there a second for that motion?
I'll second it. This is Karen.
Thank you. All right, Mr. O'Keefe, you want to give us the highlights?
I do. I mean, I've given some of them already, so I've be repeating myself, but bottom line is with the operating fund is that we are currently officially forecasting to make budget, but I do believe we'll have a small surplus. How small or how large, again, will depend on finalizing the negotiations on our transportation. I am very optimistic. Capital, we're continuing to do well. We've come down about $10 million since December to about 21.5 million. And Dan reminded me during this call that the cooling tower work at the high school is nearing completion, so that should also continue to reduce the available balance. So making a lot of headway there. In terms of staffing, vacancies, and purchasing, there's not much of significance to talk to. I did want to mention food services. You'll see in the package that we do have an updated year-end forecast that takes into consideration COVID-19. As you know, there's no revenue coming in at the cafeteria, so you'll see that the full year estimate for revenue will be off budget by about $1.1 million. The good news is what we're held to is how we do on the expense side, and we will significantly underrun on expense to the tune of about $500,000. So we don't have the revenue from the cafeteria sales, and we don't have the cost of that food. What we do have is the cost of the sandwiches that we're providing and distributing, but that's a lower cost. So all that means is that we're going to underrun our expense budget, which is goodness. The town is very happy to hear about it.
Sean, I just want to highlight something you said, though, that's important for the board to get focused on. Everybody likes to talk about having us be this independent entity from the town. You just said something remarkably important. We're short on revenue. And you know who's owning that exposure? The town of Greenwich, not the Board of Education. So we should recognize that this thing of us being independent cuts both ways. Sometimes it could benefit us. Some situations it could hurt us. Personally, I like that the town of Greenwich is the backstop and that we're not out there hunting for even more money this year given this situation. So it's very illustrative, and I'm glad you brought it up.
Anybody have any other questions? I think we'll know more on the negotiations with transportation in the next week.
Thank you. And I know that we're taking 2 up tonight just because there was an absence in your department. So thank you for catching up with us. All right. So
and as far as that, we did have a transfer in May. We'll take that up with the when we do the May financials next month.
Great. Thank you for the clarification. All right. So the motion on the table is to authorize the financial report for the period ending April 30, 2020 and March 31, 2020. Bernstein's a yes. Ms. Stowe?
Yes.
Ms. Hirsch?
Yes.
Ms. Downey?
Yes.
Mr. Kelly?
Yes.
Ms. Kowalski?
Yes.
Ms. Olson?
Yes.
Mr. Scher?
Yes.
All right, thank you. So the next item is transfers. As Sean just mentioned, there's not a transfer we're taking up at the moment. So I'm just going to make a motion to table this to a future meeting. Can we get a second for that motion?
I'll
This is
second it.
Karen, second.
All right.
I think I beat you, Kathleen.
All right.
You can have
It matters not. Hearing no discussion on the item, the motion is to table the transfers to a future meeting. Bernstein's a yes. Ms. Stowe?
Yes.
Ms. Hirsch?
Yes.
Ms. Downey?
Yes.
I think you're a yes, but I couldn't hear you.
Oh, I am, yes.
Okay. Mr. Kelly?
Yes.
Ms. Kowalski?
Yes.
Ms. Olson?
Did you call me?
Yeah, just call.
Yes.
Thank you. And Mr. Scher?
Yes.
All right, thank you. Just to the last item on our agenda then is agenda planning. So just a couple things we talked about. One is more discussions about return to school. We know that's coming. There was an ask for a Cardinal Stadium update. There obviously were budget. You can just presume that every time we meet until we've resolved the issue, which will be forever, we'll probably be talking about budget. And then strategic plan, I believe, we'll add it to the next meeting, and Peter will call that committee together to come up with a recommendation for us as to what we want to do to take that forward. With that, does anybody else have anything for agenda planning? All right, hearing none. Mr. Kelly, did you have a motion for us?
Yes, I would like to make a motion to adjourn, please.
All right, well, I'll happily second that. I'll do a quick roll call just for fun. Bernstein, yes. Stowe?
Yes.
You really had to think about that one.
He enjoys our company so much, she had to pause.
Miss Hirsch?
Yes, please.
Miss Downey?
Yes.
Mr. Kelly?
Yes.
Miss Kowalski?
Yes.
Miss Olson?
Yes.
Mr. Scher?
He's gone.
All right. We're going to put him down for a not present for the vote. All right. Thank you, everybody, for your participation this evening. For our loyal attendees that are still on, thank you for following us. We love you. Don't forget to click the like button. And everybody have a good night.
Right.
Night.
Bye.
Good night.
Night.